Chapter 493. Do I look good? Shui Ilan turned around and looked at Ning Xuemore with his arms crossed. A trace of ridicule flashed through his eyes. Ning Xuemore realized that she had been staring at his body for more than 10 seconds. She felt a little embarrassed, but she did not show it on her face. It's just SOSO. My body is just SOSO. Shui Ilan walked in front of her and lifted her chin. His eyes narrowed dangerously. Then tell me, whose body is not SOSO? Han Shanue's. Did you see his body? Ning Xuemore was speechless. She had never seen the body of that big block of ice. She hadn't even seen his face clearly. Sometimes, she could clearly see his face, but she did not know why. She would forget his face in the blink of an eye. Even now, when she thought of that person, she still could not remember his face. He did not wear a mask, but he looked like he was wearing one. That person dressed very carefully. His wide sleeves wrapped himself tightly like a rice dumpling. Not even an inch of his skin was exposed. Perhaps if she did not run away, she would be able to see his body when they consummate their marriage tomorrow night. You miss him? Ning Xuemore felt a sudden pain in her chin. Shui Ilan pulled her thoughts back. Shui Ilan's voice was like ice rain. You really saw him? Ning Xuemore was annoyed by his jealous tone. She sneered, he is my fiancé. What's so strange about seeing him? His body is 1,000 times better than yours. No, 10,000 times better. Since this guy was so vain, she would say something that would anger him to death. You are looking for death. Shui Ilan was furious. He raised his hand and wanted to tear her clothes. But his hand stopped halfway. He stared at Ning Xuemore for a moment and smiled. You are still a virgin. How could you see him? Little girl, you should be more careful with your words. His finger caressed her lips. It doesn't matter even if you've seen him. When I undo your heavenly marriage restriction, I'll let you have a taste of a real man. His lips came close to her ear, and his warm breath brushed against her face. My skills in bed are excellent. I'll definitely make you, and you'll never want to leave me again. He was so close to her that Ning Xuemore felt goosebumps all over her body. His words were obviously a little obscene and flirtatious, but coming from his mouth, it didn't sound vulgar. Instead, it had a kind of seductive charm. Ning Xuemore closed her eyes slightly and did not respond to his words. She did not want him to do something even more despicable. Shui Ilan smiled. His mood seemed to have improved slightly. Seeing how tough you are usually, I thought you wouldn't care about this. It turns out that you know how to be shy. Out of nowhere, he took out a robe and put it on her shoulders, covering her body tightly. From now on, only I can see your body. No one else is allowed to see it. Do you hear me? Ning Xuemore was too lazy to care about him. A faint light lit up in Shui Ilan's palm and covered his entire body. The light circled around him and disappeared after a while. He stood up again. Miraculously, the blackness on his face that was caused by the lightning strike had disappeared. It was as if he had just taken a shower. His whole body was refreshed, and his skin was as white as jade. He stretched out his hand again, and a new set of robes appeared in his palm. He seemed to like the color red, and the robes were still red. Chapter 494. He seemed to have a preference for red. His robe was still red. He slowly put it on. He smoothed out his hair that was slowly falling down. Actually, from the moment he used his hair to throw people, there was no one else in the cabin. They all ran out of the cabin like a gust of wind. There were only the two of them in the big cabin. After a while, Shui Ilan returned to being a handsome young man. However, his waist-length hair was much shorter. The ends of his hair were damaged by the lightning, so he simply cut them off. He tidied everything up and sat down in the center of the cabin. He lazily said, "The first group can come in." The commotion in the cabin just now naturally caused the people outside to be in a state of shock. None of them dared to come in and take a look. The scenery around them was still dark. The big ship floated in the water. No one knew where it would drift to. There were man-eating monsters in the water. Moreover, it wasn't just one. They saw 7 or 8 of them just now. Those monsters surrounded the ship. From time to time, they would reveal their dorsal fins. No one could leave. If they wanted to live, They had to defeat the red-clothed Ivildor. There were 38 Guqin players outside, including the judges. There were 2 judges who were too old and didn't meet Shui Ilan's requirements. They were sent out. The other 36 people were split into groups of 8. There were still 4 people left as substitutes. In this group, Jiyu Xian's prestige was the highest. He was the one who assigned the groups. He matched each group according to their own playing characteristics, striving to achieve the most perfect result. The people were divided into groups. The leader of each group was the one with the best Guqin skills. No one objected. At this time, everyone had to be united to survive. No one dared to fight for anything. Yang Ziyuan kept waiting for him to assign her to a group. But she didn't expect that in the end. He still didn't seem to see her. He still looked down on her, right? He thought she wasn't worthy of being a group leader. Yang Ziyuan felt bitter. Fortunately, she was used to being disappointed and didn't take it to heart. At the end of the line, Jiyu Xian called out her name. Ziyuan. He then called out a few more names. We'll be in the same group. If it was in the past, being assigned to the same team as Jiyu Xian, she might have been overjoyed. But now, she wouldn't think about it anymore. Her piano skills were indeed complementary to Jiyu Xian's, so it was natural for her to be assigned to the same group. Rong Yang had been nervously waiting for a long time, but she still hadn't been assigned. Seeing that the last group had been assigned, she couldn't help but ask, "Brother Xian, can I be in the same group as you?" Jiyu Xian didn't even look at her. "No, you can be a substitute." Rong Yang was startled and looked at the other 3 people who were also substitutes. The 3 of them also looked weak and delicate. It seemed like Jiyu Xian was really taking care of her. She felt a sweetness in her heart. "Brother Xian, I'll listen to you." At this time, being a substitute was much safer than being a team member. While speaking, she glanced at Yang Ziyuan in a teasing manner. "Miss Yang is also a substitute." Yi Feng, who had been watching with folded arms, suddenly said coldly. Jiyu Xian didn't say anything, but Yang Ziyuan promptly said, "No, I and Master Jiyu Xian's piano skills complement each other. We can cooperate to suppress each other's piano skills. For the sake of everyone's safety, I will fight." Her words were calm, official, and rational. Yi Feng didn't speak and still stood beside her. Chapter 495. Jiyu Xian looked at her with a complicated gaze. She had always called him master, but this was the first time she called him Great Master Jiyu Xian. Her voice was clear and crisp, but he felt that it was extremely harsh. He took a deep breath and suppressed the indescribable feeling of irritation in his heart. This was not the time to think about messy things. He had to explain to everyone what they should pay attention to when cooperating. He was indeed a great master of the ancient zither. He had special instructions for each group, and each instruction was important. In this kind of life and death situation, everyone listened very carefully. He had just finished explaining when Shui Ilan's voice came from inside, allowing one group to enter. According to the plan, the first group of people walked in without hesitation. After a while, the sound of the zither finally came out from inside the cabin. Because Shui Ilan had told them in advance, only one group was allowed to enter at a time. The others could only wait outside and could not peek. Otherwise, if he found out, he would kill everyone to silence them. Because of this threat, these people naturally did not dare to take the risk, and all of them pricked up their ears to listen. Jiyu Xian was worthy of being called an expert. He only needed to concentrate for a moment before he could tell which zither was being played by which person. The first group performed well. They were indeed playing according to his instructions. At the beginning, there was a bit of a flaw, but after playing a few notes, they became more and more in sync. The melody was grand, almost lifting the roof of the ship. Such a big and loud zither, it should be enough to suppress the red-clothed Ivildor's zither, right? They had not heard the red-clothed Ivildor's zither until now. Could it be that it was suppressed? Jiyu Xian had not finished thinking, when a clear and bright zither sound slowly came out, directly drilling into everyone's ears. This zither sound did not sound arrogant, it was even a bit soft, but it was like lightning pushing through the clouds, so clear, so bright. Not to mention the people inside the cabin, even the people outside felt their heartstrings being pulled when they heard this zither sound. It skipped a few beats. Needless to say, this completely different Guqin sound was played by Shui Ilan. The Guqin sounds of those 8 people could not suppress him at all. After the sound of the zither reverberated for a few beats, the rhythm of the other zither sounds was obviously disrupted. The harmony was broken, and some of the zither sounds actually changed their tune, unknowingly following Shui Ilan's zither sounds. After a few more tunes, 2 more zithers followed. After a short while, 6 of the 8 zithers began to follow Shui Ilan's tune. The other 2 couldn't hold on any longer and finally followed. The expressions of the people who had been listening outside changed greatly. Some of the more impatient ones simply shouted outside, wanting to remind their companions inside. Anyway, Shui Ilan didn't forbid it. The crowd outside began to clamor, each voice louder than the last. The sound of the Guqin inside had already become a harmonious 9-piece, like the roaring of the Yangtze River. And Shui Ilan's zither sound was always in a dominant position, like a phoenix leading the chirping of 100 birds, flying straight to the 9 heavens. Everyone's throats were almost hoarse from shouting, but they still could not suppress the sound of the zither, nor could they wake up the people inside who were playing the zither. Stop! Jiyu Xian suddenly shouted, successfully stopping everyone's blind shouting. Everyone turned to look at him. He took a breath and made a gesture, asking everyone to gather around him. Chapter 496. He lowered his voice and said in a voice that only the people around him could hear, "His music can bewitch people's hearts and affect the mind of the person playing the zither. We must think of other ways." Other ways. Everyone looked at each other and couldn't think of any way. Yi Feng said from the side, "Just don't listen to his music." Everyone was stunned and immediately came over. Yes, don't listen to him. These people usually listen to the sound of the zither and subconsciously distinguish the quality of the other party's music. Unexpectedly, they didn't think of covering their ears and not listening to the other party's music. The people in the second group immediately agreed on the music they were going to play together, and then they tore the corners of their clothes and prepared to go in and play with cloth balls in their ears. If they don't listen to the other party's music, they won't be led away by the other party. After about 7 or 8 minutes, the sound of the zither finally stopped. There was a dead silence in the cabin. The people outside also held their breath. What happened to the people inside? Why was there no movement at all? Even if they were killed, at least 1 or 2 of the 8 people would scream, right? But, no. After the zither stopped, there was no sound in the cabin. It was like a tomb of the living dead. Nervous, unprecedented nervous. This kind of fear in the face of the unknown made people even more nervous. Rong Yang's pretty face was pale and full of cold sweat. Her small hand pulled Jiyu Xian's lapel as if she wanted to get some strength from him to support herself. Although Jiyu Xian was calm, his forehead was also dripping with cold sweat. He was also afraid and nervous. But he was now the backbone of everyone. He couldn't lose his mind. He couldn't help but look at Yang Ziyuan. He saw her slender body standing straight like a lonely pine tree. She was also a weak woman. At this moment, she didn't rely on anyone. In his impression, this young lady was arrogant and high-profile, her mouth was unforgiving, and she looked down on ordinary people. But in front of him, she liked to make a fuss about nothing. From time to time, she would find an excuse to throw herself at him, wanting to have physical contact with him. After knowing him for less than 2 months, she confessed to him and bluntly said that she liked him. Her boldness almost made him tongue-tied. Moreover, because of his first impression, he didn't have a good impression of her. Her boldness was no different from indulgence in his eyes, so after being her zither player for a few months, he finally stopped. He thought that he hated her. In order to completely cut off her thoughts, he even let Rong Yang stay by his side, making her think that he already had a sweetheart. In the end, Yang Ziyuan backed off and stopped pestering him. He suddenly realized that without her chattering by his side, his surroundings seemed to have become much emptier, and his heart seemed to have lost a corner. He couldn't figure out what he was thinking about her. He seemed to be annoyed by her, but he also wanted to see her. Seeing her misbehaving, he couldn't help but stab her with his words. He thought that he liked a gentle and virtuous woman like Rong Yang, but his heart couldn't help but lean towards that woman. He had always felt that she had a lot of flaws, and compared to her looks, they were like heaven and earth. But at this moment, he suddenly realized that this girl was actually very open and above board. She dared to love and hate, and she didn't like to rely on men like ordinary girls. At this critical moment, she was calmer than many men. She stood there in her red dress, like a bunch of fire, igniting his eyes and attracting his gaze. Chapter 497. At this moment, Jiyu Xian actually hoped that she would come close to him and hold his sleeves like Rong Yang, and lean on him like before. However, she didn't even want to come close to him, let alone hold his sleeves. Jiyu Xian had intentionally or unintentionally moved a few steps closer to her. But she only raised her head to look at him, and then very sensibly avoided him. She was standing quite close to her shadow guard. Yi Feng was like a silent mountain, but also like an unsheathed sword, standing beside Yang Ziyuan, steady, reliable, and giving people strength for no reason. At such a critical moment, he became Yang Ziyuan's guardian, not allowing anyone to slight him. As if he felt Jiyu Xian's gaze, Yi Feng swept a glance at him. Such a sharp and indifferent glance actually made Jiyu Xian's heart inexplicably tremble, and his fingers lightly clenched. Jiyu Xian was distracted for a moment, and actually didn't notice when the second wave of people went in. When he came back to his senses, the second wave of people had already started playing the guqin. The second wave of people went in with their ears covered, so they couldn't hear each other's guqin, and only relied on hand gestures to play their own guqin. Because of this, the tunes played by the 8 guqin were slightly disharmonious. Fortunately, it didn't affect the overall situation, and the sound was loud enough. Shui Yilan's guqin sounded again. After a moment, the faces of the nervous people outside changed again. The 8 people who just went in with their ears covered, and obviously shouldn't have heard the other party's guqin, but now they actually started to play along with Shui Yilan's tune. After 3 to 4 minutes, the guqin inside had completely harmonized, and just like the first wave of people, they completely followed the other party's guqin. No one could escape this fate. Could it be that the cloth in their ears was removed when they went in? The hearts of the people outside were as heavy as lead, and their faces were ashen. Needless to say, the second wave of people was about to be defeated, and the first wave of people still didn't come out, so they didn't know what happened. If this went on, everyone's fate would be worrying. Most likely, none of them would be able to escape death. With the Grim Reaper's scythe above their heads, naturally everyone was frightened. The excessive tension made several women, including Rong Yang, cry, and 2 even fainted. Yang Ziyuan was also afraid, but what was the use of being afraid now? What's the use of crying? It was easier to make people confused and infected them with pessimism. Yang Ziyuan said in a low voice, "Why are you crying? At worst, he would just die. Shut up, all of you. Yi Feng, if anyone cries again, I'll throw them into the lake to feed the monsters." "All right." Yi Feng agreed without hesitation, his gaze sweeping over the few crying women. This kind of threat was more effective than any kind of consolation. The women shuddered, and as expected, they stopped crying and choked back their sobs. The other men present couldn't help but look at Yang Ziyuan with admiration in their eyes. Xian Gij, you see, at this time she still doesn't forget to bully people. Rong Yang pulled Jiyu Xian's sleeve, and couldn't help but want to complain. Jiyu Xian pulled back his sleeve, looked sideways at Rong Yang, and said in a cold voice, "If bullying people can make you shut up and not cry, I will also bully people." This sentence made Rong Yang's face pale, and she didn't dare to speak again. Yang Ziyuan didn't expect Jiyu Xian to speak for her at this time, and couldn't help but glance at him. Jiyu Xian was also looking at her. Chapter 498. It just so happened that Jiyu Xian was also looking at her. When their gazes met, Yang Ziyuan immediately turned her head to look at the water in the distance. It was already a foregone conclusion that the second wave would lose. They had to make preparations for the third wave. Yi Feng suddenly took a step forward. "Excuse me." A faint silver light flashed between his fingers and flashed in front of the third wave. His figure was as fast as a ghost, and his technique was even faster. Everyone was caught off guard, and they all fell into his trap. Everyone felt a pain in their ears and a buzzing sound. They couldn't hear anything. "You, what are you doing?" The 8 people cried out. Yifeng used his fingertips to write a few words on the boat with water. I stabbed your acupoints that cause deafness. You will be deaf for a day and then you will recover. Only then did everyone come to a realization. Jiyu Xian looked at Yifeng with admiration. At this time, it was indeed better to be deaf than not. Moreover, it was just being deaf for a day. It was worth it to be deaf for a day in exchange for victory. Time was of the essence. Jiyu Xian also used water to write down the things they needed to pay attention to. The 8 people nodded in agreement. Because some of them had poor mental fortitude and were so scared that they couldn't hold the zither properly, Jiyu Xian swapped out 2 people at the last minute. In addition to the 2 people who had fainted from fright, the original 4 substitutes were also arranged. Soon, the third group of people also entered the cabin with their hearts in their mouths. This was the last method they could think of. If even this failed, they might not have a chance to win anymore. Nervous, unprecedentedly nervous. The air outside the cabin was so heavy that it seemed to freeze. Even 1 minute seemed to be extremely long. The people who went in were already deaf. It was impossible for them to hear the sound of the red-clothed Evildor's zither. It was impossible for them to follow the sound of the zither, right? Yang Ziyuan clenched her hands tightly. Her palms were covered in cold sweat. Suddenly, her small hands were grabbed by a large hand. I'm here. Don't be afraid. The voice was steady and gave her strength for no reason. Yang Ziyuan turned around and saw Yifeng's dark eyes. Yang Ziyuan stared blankly for a moment and suddenly felt a lot more at ease. She nodded slightly, as if to say to him, but also as if to encourage herself. We will survive. That's right. Most of the people present were young. They were at the age where flowers were about to bloom. Who would be willing to die silently here? 5 minutes later, the few people waiting outside finally lost all hope. The third wave of people had clearly been deafened, but they only lasted for 2 to 3 minutes. Then, she once again followed Shui Yilan's music. Jiyu Xian's face was ashen. At this point, he was already in despair and couldn't think of any other good ideas. When the third wave of people finished playing, Shui Yilan urged for the fourth wave of people. Another person fainted from fright. The final group had 7 people. 7 people couldn't meet Shui Yilan's requirements. According to Shui Yilan's words, if the fourth wave of people couldn't be gathered, he would simply take their lives. Yifeng suddenly rushed forward and picked up the zither of a fainted person. He simply said, I'll do it. Jiyu Xian looked at him in shock. You know how to play. Yifeng didn't answer his question. Instead, he walked in with large strides. Jiyu Xian and the others could only follow. This was already the last wave of people. Yang Ziyuan finally saw the layout of the cabin. Shui Yilan was sitting in the middle in red clothes. Chapter 499. Shui Yilan had a blue zither on his lap and the other people who came in earlier were nowhere to be seen. In the corner of the cabin, there was only Ning Shuamore sitting on a chair. She was also wearing a red robe and her sitting posture was a bit strange. It was like she was stiff and didn't move at all. Only her eyes were slightly lowered and her eyelashes would occasionally flutter a few times. Because she had fallen into the water, Ning Shuamore's makeup had been completely washed off and her original appearance was revealed. Her face was as white as jade, her eyes were watery, her nose was high, and her lips were cherry red. It was like the rough outer layer of a gem had been polished off and the resplendent inside was finally revealed. She was extremely beautiful, so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. Ning Shuamore's face was a bit pale. When she saw Yang Ziyuan and the others come in, her eyes flashed with sadness and she looked at Shui Yilan with hatred. Yang Ziyuan's eyes looked at Ning Shuamore's face and she pursed her lips. Her eyes flashed with sadness. Shui, everything you showed me was fake. She had treated her as a real friend. But not only was her name fake, even her face was fake. Ning Shuamore's mute acupuncture point had been sealed and she couldn't speak. This short half an hour was definitely the biggest nightmare of her life. She sat there like a puppet, staring blankly at the living people coming in one by one. According to Shui Yilan's request, each of them sat in a position to play the zither. She could clearly see the fear and struggle in their eyes. She watched as they played the zither with all their might. She watched as they couldn't get rid of Shwe Ilan's zither music. She watched as strands of vital chi flowed towards the zither on Shwe Ilan's lap. She watched as a string on the zither appeared from nothing. She watched as those people's black hair turned white and the youths in their prime turned into old people with wrinkled skin and white hair. Every time Shwe Ilan's last note fell, those people would fall to the ground one after another as if all their energy had been sucked out of them, dying silently. In the end, Shwe Ilan waved his sleeve and threw the corpses out of the window. She didn't know what method he used, but when the corpses fell into the water, there was no sound at all. She couldn't hear the sound of them falling into the water. Just like that, she watched as wave after wave of people came in and repeated the same path. Just now, these people were still talking and laughing. They were even in high spirits as they played with their true abilities. She had even commented on a few of them. She even had the banknotes they gave her. Although Ning Xuemo was used to seeing life and death, the repeated scenes of the flower-like young man's life still shocked her to the core, almost making her want to vomit. Chapter 500. Coincidentally, Yifeng also glanced at her. Their eyes met. Ning Xuemo blinked, then looked at herself, then at Yifeng, and then at herself. Yifeng seemed to be slightly taken aback, and then he seemed to have understood something. He did not speak, still standing beside Yang Ziyuan. Where are the others? Rong Yang could not help but ask. The layout of this place was clear at a glance. She could not see the shadows of the original group of people who came in. Shwe Ilan sat there, plucking the strings with his fingers. His smile was like a trickling spring, guess? Rong Yang was dazed by his smile. She knew that the person in front of her was a demon who killed without blinking, but she was still fascinated by his smile. Her mind was in a trance for a moment. I can't guess. Since you can't guess, then don't guess. Shwe Ilan's voice was as warm as the spring breeze. I will count to 10, and each of you will sit in a position. I don't seem to be very patient. If you can't do it, I will be sorry to everyone. Everyone. There were 8 praying mats placed around Shwe Ilan, and they happened to be in 8 positions. Could it be that there was something strange about his praying mats? At this time, no one dared to be negligent, and each of them chose a direction and walked over. Shwe Ilan's counting voice was very leisurely, and his speed was also quite fast. Soon, everyone found their positions. A few of the more scheming people did not sit on the praying mats, but directly sat on the ground. Shwe Ilan glanced at those people lightly, but did not say anything. Rong Yang liked to be clean, so she even used her sleeve to brush the praying mat. She was about to sit down when she suddenly felt a sudden numbness in her leg. She was already very nervous, so when she was suddenly hit, she sat down with a thump and instantly screamed. Her cry was shrill, and her voice was not soft, so it immediately attracted everyone's attention. Even Shwe Ilan glanced in her direction. It was also at this moment that Yifeng, who had already approached Ning Xuemo, arrived beside Ning Xuemo like a bolt of lightning. The long sword in his hand was unsheathed and pressed against Ning Xuemo's back. By the time Shwe Ilan noticed, Yifeng had already succeeded. The position he was standing at was extremely tricky. His entire body was hidden behind Ning Xuemo. His sword was sharp. As long as he breathed in and out slightly, he could directly stab into Ning Xuemo's back. Shwe Ilan narrowed his eyes and looked at Yifeng lazily. What are you doing? Let us go. Otherwise, I'll kill her. Yifeng's goal was clear. Obviously, no one had expected this sudden change. Everyone held their breaths, not knowing how things would develop. Ning Xuemo sighed in relief. Just now, she had looked at Yifeng as if her eyes were cramping. In fact, this was what she meant. She thought that this cold blockhead didn't understand, but it turned out that he didn't move at all. This child is teachable. This child is teachable. Ning Xuemo also looked at Shwe Ilan. She never thought that Shwe Ilan would have feelings for her. She always felt that this bastard kept her alive for some other purpose and wouldn't let her die so easily. Shwe Ilan laughed. You want to use her to threaten me? Do you think she's qualified? Yifeng's voice was calm. Whether she's qualified or not, we'll only know after we try. This is our only chance. If you defeat me, you still have a chance. Now that you're acting like this, you've angered me. I don't want to give you the only chance anymore. Chapter 501. As soon as these words came out, everyone's face changed. Originally, they wanted to use their zither skills to make a final gamble, but now that they have angered this Evildor, their only chance will be lost. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Although Ning Shuemor couldn't move or speak, she could still see everyone's expression. She clearly saw their expressions and her heart sank. She inwardly cursed, "This is bad. If these people are not united, this red-clothed Evildor will definitely take advantage of their weakness. This bastard is best at psychological attacks." Sure enough, Shui Ilan's gaze swept across the crowd. Smiling slightly, he said, "This person has destroyed your only chance to fight for your life. What do you want to do?" Everyone looked at each other, but no one spoke. "Seeing that you are not accomplices, this lord can give you a chance. Let him stop this stupid act. Otherwise, this lord will directly send you to feed the monsters." At this moment, Rong Yang had already climbed up from the ground. She also understood that the reason why she fell down just now was because of Yifeng's mischief. He borrowed her scream to attract Shuilan's attention so that he could carry out his plan of attack. He succeeded, but they were all screwed. Is this red-clothed Evildor a person who is easily threatened? What is Ning Shuemor? Will this red-clothed Evildor really put her in his heart? Yifeng's actions are useless. It will only anger this red-clothed Evildor and make the situation worse. Rong Yang couldn't help but open her mouth, but she was angry at Yang Ziyuan. "Yang Ziyuan, take care of your bodyguard. Don't let him do stupid things." Yang Ziyuan's face was also pale. Looking at Ning Shuemor and then looking at Yifeng. "Yifeng, don't." Although Ning Shuemor did not tell her a lot of things, but in her heart, she has always treated Ning Shuemor as a friend. Her own bodyguard threatening her friend, this made her a little embarrassed. Yifeng's face was cold. "Miss Yang, this woman did not harm you enough. They are in cahoots." The treasured sword moved slightly forward. Ning Shuemor's clothes were thin to begin with, so when the tip of his sword moved slightly, blood seeped out from her back. Ning Shuemor groaned in a low voice as she furrowed her brows. Shui Ilan's eyes darkened and he suddenly reached out his hand. Yang Ziyuan screamed and threw herself into Shui Ilan's arms. Two cold fingers pinched Yang Ziyuan's throat. Shui Ilan chuckled. "Aren't you risking your life to save her? I might as well kill her first." Yang Ziyuan's pretty face flushed red when he exerted a little force with his fingers. She couldn't even breathe properly. "I'll count to 3. If you continue to be stubborn, I'll kill her directly. 1. Yifeng's face changed slightly, but he did not back down. "If you don't agree to my conditions, I'll kill your accomplice. 1, 2. He counted even faster than Shui Ilan. Shui Ilan. This was the first time he met someone who dared to challenge him like this. "You can kill that girl, but I'll make all of you accompany her in death." Shui Ilan's voice was cold. "If I let her go, we will really die without a burial ground." Yifeng's voice was as calm as iron. "Rather than that, I might as well take a gamble. Maybe I can fight for a chance of survival. Even if I die in the end, I won't lose anything if I can drag your concubine down with me." This Yifeng was indeed calm and smart. He could see the situation clearly. Was this person really an ordinary shadow guard? Chapter 502. Ning Shuemor gave him a thumbs up in her heart. If she was in Yifeng's position, she would probably do the same. Shui Ilan narrowed his eyes. "Aren't you afraid of angering me and killing her now? Don't you like her? Are you willing to let her die like this?" His fingers tightened around Yang Ziyuan's throat, causing her small face to turn green. Yifeng narrowed his eyes slightly and said coldly, "She's just my master. You think too much. If I let you go, we will all die, and so will she. What's the difference between now and then?" This young man is so calm that it's scary. Shui Ilan's eyes darkened. "If she dies in my hands like this, won't you regret it?" "No. I want to protect the lives of the majority of people and myself. If she dies and I escape with my life, I will report to her father and give her a good coffin. Shwe Ilan smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. So you are even more ruthless than me. I am a fugitive. Being ruthless is my nature. Yi Feng's voice was like ice. It was obvious that he was ready to risk everything. A fugitive's patience is limited. Your Excellency, do you agree to this condition of mine? The sword in his hand slightly moved forward, causing more blood to flow out from Ning Xuemo's back. It had already begun to drip onto the floor. Good. I like people like you who are ruthless. I agree. Shwe Ilan suddenly let go of Yang Ziyuan. Yang Ziyuan had been holding her breath for a long time. Her face was already green. Now that she was free, she immediately gasped for air. She staggered a few steps and almost fell. An arm from the side supported her. Ziyuan, are you okay? Yang Ziyuan could only focus on gasping for air. She could not speak for a while. She could only shake her head. Her eyes were fixed on Yi Feng's face, as if it was the first time she had met him. Jiyu Xian held her arm. When he saw her expression, his expression changed slightly. It was Jiyu Xian who was supporting her, but her eyes and thoughts were not on him. Once again, he was truly close to this delicate body. Unexpectedly, he felt very touched and a very warm feeling welled up in his heart. In his heart, there was a kind of happiness that he had lost and then regained. Ziyuan, your neck is injured. I have some medicine here. Jiyu Xian helped her sit down. There was a bruise on her neck, and she had to apply some medicine to prevent the bruise from spreading. Xian Gij. Rong Yang didn't expect that Jiyu Xian would care about Yang Ziyuan. She was very dissatisfied and couldn't help but call out. Jiyu Xian ignored her. He took out some Jinchuang ointment and applied it on her wound. Yang Ziyuan's soul seemed to have been squeezed out by Shwe Ilan. Her beautiful face was pale, and she seemed to have lost her soul. On the other side, Shwe Ilan clapped his hands and looked at Yi Feng unkindly. I have already agreed to your conditions. Why are you still not letting her go? Yi Feng said, Your Excellency, make an oath in front of the devil ancestor. If I let her go, you will never find trouble with us again and take our lives. Ning Xuemo was speechless. It seemed that this Yi Feng knew a lot. He also knew that Shwe Ilan was a demon. Shwe Ilan's face sank. Yi Feng, you have guts. Yi Feng didn't say anything, but his expression showed that he wasn't willing to take a step back. Shwe Ilan's gaze turned to Ning Xuemo's small face. Ning Xuemo's small face was pale, and she was also looking at him. When their eyes met, Ning Xuemo actually smiled. Shwe Ilan didn't know what she was smiling about, but he faintly felt that she was up to no good. Chapter 503. Shwe Ilan squinted his eyes and smiled. Isn't it just swearing in front of the devil ancestor? It's not difficult at all. He swore. After he finished, Yi Feng apologized and let go of Ning Xuemo. Shwe Ilan's sleeves shook, rolling Ning Xuemo into his embrace. His left arm wrapped around her, and he gritted his teeth beside her ear. You little bastard who only cares about outsiders. Aren't you afraid that he will kill you? Ning Xuemo's acupuncture points were still sealed. She just blinked her eyes and couldn't speak. She didn't have any other reaction. She knew that Yi Feng wouldn't really kill her. As for Yi Feng taking her as a hostage, it was also her who secretly hinted him with her eyes. However, she didn't expect Shwe Ilan to agree so quickly. It seemed like he was really afraid that she would die. Yi Feng finally heaved a sigh of relief. He had taken a risk to block her. Not bad, he had won. He had finally won a chance to live for all the survivors. His gaze fell on Yang Ziyuan again. He saw that she was half leaning in Jiyu Xian's arms. Her face was still pale, and her eyes were dark and unfocused. It seemed like she hadn't come back to her senses. His eyes showed a hint of guilt. When he was about to go forward to take a look, he suddenly heard Shwe Ilan chuckling. You are lucky this time. Even if I don't kill you, do you think you can escape alive? Before his laughter stopped, he had already floated up like a red cloud and smashed the roof of the ship. Everyone was shocked. Before they could react, they suddenly heard Yi Feng let out a muffled groan. He staggered 2 steps and fell on the floor with a plop. Shui Ilan's laughter came from above the hole in the cabin. I hate being threatened the most. Let me teach you a lesson. His laughter faded and he was already far away. Yi Feng lay there. He felt that his internal organs were in so much pain that they were about to flip over. Cold sweat dripped down from his forehead. He couldn't get up and could only lie there gasping for breath. A pair of embroidered shoes stopped in front of his eyes. His body stiffened, and he slowly raised his head to meet Yang Ziyuan's ink-black eyes. She looked down at him. "How are you?" Yi Feng lowered his eyes and said in a cold voice, "It's just a small injury. He won't die. Won't die. Haha, how can a person like you die?" Yang Ziyuan sneered. She slowly squatted down and looked into his eyes. She stubbornly wanted an answer. "Did you really not care about my safety just now? If I die, will you really only prepare a coffin for me? Ziyuan, now that we're out of danger, don't ask anymore." He was also in a hurry and had no other choice. "After all, we're out of danger, aren't we?" Someone tried to persuade him. "Shut up." Yang Ziyuan fiercely replied to that person. She turned her head to look at Yi Feng as if she wouldn't give up until she got a clear answer. "Answer me." Yi Feng's body stiffened. He lowered his eyes and only replied with one word, "Yes, Pa." His face received a fierce slap. "Yi Feng, you're only a hidden guard. I'm the master and you're the servant. What right do you have to decide my life or death?" Half of Yi Feng's face was burning. He lowered his eyes and pursed his lips without replying. "Yi Feng, I've always hated you. Do you know that?" Yang Ziyuan's large eyes seemed to be burning with fire. "I know." Yi Feng slightly closed his eyes. "Haha, it's good that you know. Let me tell you, I hate you even more now. When we get home, I'll tell father to remove you from your position as a hidden guard." Yi Feng's face became even paler. After pausing for a moment, he replied with 2 words, "Do as you wish." Yang Ziyuan, she felt an inexplicable fire in her chest rush up. She couldn't help reaching out to push Yi Feng. "Go die. I don't want you anymore." Chapter 504. She was quite strong, but she couldn't move Yi Feng at all. She got up in a fit of anger and walked out of the cabin. When she reached the cabin door, she tripped over the high threshold and almost fell out. "Be careful." Jiyu Xian supported her from the side. Yang Ziyuan steadied herself and looked at Jiyu Xian who was beside her. He was still as handsome as before and was no longer cold to her. He had even started to take care of her. This was supposed to be a happy occasion for her, but why did she still want to cry? She turned around and looked coldly at Yi Feng who was still lying there before turning around and walking out. The others also didn't want to stay in the cabin. They felt that there was a gloomy ghost aura here, so they all walked out to see if the illusion outside had been broken or not. Yi Feng was the only one left in the spacious cabin. He was lying there alone. Only when everyone had left did he start to pant heavily. He slowly stretched out his hand. His originally pale palm was now pitch black. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. There was no need to ask. It was Shui Ilan who had plotted against him before he left. The corners of his lips twitched and he closed his eyes again. Even if Yang Ziyuan didn't chase him away, he wouldn't be able to stay by her side. Yuan, take care. I didn't think that you and I would still not be fated in this life." Outside the cabin, everyone looked at the rolling river below and felt helpless. That demonic red-clothed Evildor had already left. Why was the scenery still the same? The fog was still very thick. They couldn't see the road ahead and there were still monsters appearing underwater. Could it be that this wasn't an illusion, but reality? Then where was this place? What kind of method did that freak use to move such a large ship from the lake to here without anyone noticing? How were they going to leave this place? The survivors were all at a loss. They didn't know what to do. Yang Ziyuan was in a daze for a moment. She suddenly turned around and walked into the cabin. "Ziyuan, where are you going?" Jiyu Xian followed beside her. "Yi Feng seems to know something. Let's ask him what's going on." Yang Ziyuan gave an honorable reason. Finally, they returned to the cabin. However, when he entered, he did not see Yi Feng, who was supposed to be lying there. The entire hall was empty. What's going on? Yang Ziyuan circled the entire hall and the rear cabin like a whirlwind, but she still couldn't find Yifeng's shadow. She and Jiyu Xian looked at each other. Jiyu Xian said, "He might have followed them out. Let's go out and look for him." They were now on a ship surrounded by water. Yifeng couldn't have left quietly. 5 minutes later, Yang Ziyuan leaned against a mast. He left. He really left. She had already looked through every nook and cranny of the ship, but she still couldn't find Yifeng's shadow. Although she couldn't see him before, she knew in her heart that he was here. No matter where she went, he would be there. It was just that he was hiding in a place where he was supposed to be. Once she was in real danger, he would appear in time and easily rescue her from danger, keeping her away from danger. Or he would silently guard her side, blocking any disaster for her. But now, she understood in her heart that he had really left. He had abandoned his master and would never come back. Jiyu Xian silently stood by Yang Ziyuan's side. This was the first time he had seen her so weak and helpless. Chapter 505. Jiyu Xian's heart twisted, patting her hand. "Ziyuan, don't be afraid, I won't abandon you." Rong Yang also stood beside her, holding Jiyu Xian's arm, smiling at Yang Ziyuan. "Ziyuan, we will advance and retreat together with you. We won't abandon you." Jiyu Xian slightly frowned, and was about to quietly brush off Rong Yang's hand, when Yang Ziyuan pulled her hand out of Jiyu Xian's palm. Forcing herself to be spirited, she nodded at the two of them. "We are now grasshoppers on the same rope, no one can escape. Let me calm down first, let me think of a way to leave this place." She turned and walked a few steps, leaning against another pillar. Looking up at the dusky sky. The sky was covered with dense clouds, no stars, no moon, and the surroundings were dim, just like her chaotic state of mind at the moment. The few survivors discussed, using all kinds of methods they knew, but still couldn't solve this maze, unable to leave this dangerous place. Because the boatman was basically dead, in the end, they had to control the boat themselves. Randomly choosing a direction, they slowly moved forward. After all, the Avildor had already left, perhaps they could break through the maze by moving the boat a few miles. These people usually lived like princes, playing the zither was an expert, but when it came to controlling a boat, they were rookies. After a long time of hard work, everyone's hands were full of bloody blisters, but they finally grasped the knack of it. Finally, the boat started to move after swaying from side to side. About 10 minutes later, the crowd suddenly heard a cracking sound from the bottom of the boat. It was like the sound of wood cracking. Yang Ziyuan was numbly paddling the oars, her thoughts drifting away, so when she heard the strange cracking sound, she didn't think much about it. Until she heard someone shout, "Not good, the bottom of the boat is cracking. Water is entering." In a rush, panic, everyone tried to think of a way to stop the boat from cracking. Seeing the water crazily rushing in, they were afraid of being swept into the water, so they could only choose to jump off the boat. Yang Ziyuan's swimming skill was average, but fortunately she jumped into the water in time, desperately swimming away from the boat, and then watched the boat capsize, slowly sinking to the bottom. Yang Ziyuan looked around. Like her, there were only 3 people floating on the water: Jiyu Xian, Rong Yang, and Master Luo. The others were nowhere to be seen. She didn't know if they were swept into the water or eaten by some monster. Jiyu Xian's martial arts is quite good. Rong's can't swim, her whole body almost hanging on his arm, but his still swimming not slow. Seeing Yang Ziyuan, he heaved a sigh of relief and swam over with Rong Yang. "Ziyuan, are you alright?" Yang Ziyuan shook her head. "I'm fine." She couldn't help but look around. She was already in such a dangerous situation, yet Yifeng still had no intention of appearing. "Humph, if you don't want to come out, then don't come out. I don't care about you. When I go back, I'll ask my father to send me a better shadow guard. I don't want you anymore." Yang Ziyuan's heart was ruthless. "But why does my heart always hurt so much?" The 4 of them gathered together and had a simple discussion. Then, they chose a direction and swam forward together. The fog was boundless, the sky was filled with dark clouds, and the water under them was yellow and dirty. The waves came one after another, hitting their body. It was very cold. At this moment, they were sure that they were not in the lake. How can the lake be so turbid? Chapter 506. Behind them came the faint roar of the aquatic monster, which made everyone's heart skip a beat. They were no stranger to this kind of roar. After all, they had heard it for most of the night. They had also seen with their own eyes several experts who fell into the water and were directly torn apart by this kind of monster. But it was strange, although they had heard this kind of monsters roar several times, they did not see them chasing after them. It seemed that they were blocked by something. Not far behind them came the sound of fierce splashing of water, as if in that place, the monsters were fighting with something. Yang Ziyuan's heart slightly moved. She could not help but look back, but the sky was dark, she could not see anything clearly. Could it be Yi Feng who was blocking the monsters behind them? Yang Ziyuan almost could not help but swim back to take a look. Kaye. Suddenly, a flash of lightning appeared in the horizon, illuminating the surroundings in a flash. Almost at the same time, Yang Ziyuan heard a strange muffled cry. She saw a huge fishtail not far behind her. Its scales were sparkling, and there was a huge wound on the fishtail. Blood was flowing out from the wound, the lightning flashed and disappeared, the surroundings fell into darkness, and there was a loud sound of something falling into the water. Ziyuan, don't look. Quickly go. Jiyu Ziyan grabbed her arm and swam forward with her. Did you see that fishtail? Yang Ziyuan's heart was beating wildly. She felt that the fishtail was vaguely familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen it. I saw it. It should also be a monster. Quickly go. Quickly go. Behind them, the splashing of water became more violent. It was obvious that the battle between the monsters was more intense. The four of them did not dare to look back. They could only desperately swim forward. Woo. Behind them came a long mournful cry. Although the sound was mournful, it was not unpleasant to hear. It echoed in everyone's ears. Ka. Another flash of lightning struck. Yang Ziyuan could not help but look back again. She did not see the beautiful fishtail, but saw two black dorsal fins rushing towards their direction like arrows. The monster is coming. Rong Yang screamed, Brother Ziyan, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, wah. She broke down and burst into tears. Shut up. If you cry again, I'll leave you behind. Jiyu Ziyan was already nervous. Now that she was crying, he had a headache. He was actually very good at swimming, but now that he was dragging two people, his speed was more than half of his usual speed. Seeing the ink-black dorsal fin getting closer and closer, Rong Yang was scared out of her wits. She couldn't help but shout, Brother Ziyan, you can't drag two people with you. Like this, none of us can escape. She was implying that Jiyu Ziyan should throw away Yang Ziyuan. Jiyu Ziyan's face was pale. Rong Yang was the daughter of his savior. He promised that person that he would take care of her for the rest of her life. So as long as he didn't die, he couldn't abandon her. As for Yang Ziyuan, he had just understood his feelings, so how could he bear to abandon her? Yang Ziyuan's swimming was average, she could barely support herself. She looked back at the monster's dorsal fin that was getting closer and closer, and then looked at Jiyu Ziyan who was dragging her. She pursed her red lips and suddenly let go. She broke free from Jiyu Ziyan's arm and shouted, You take her away first. Jiyu Ziyan was shocked and reached out to pull her. Ziyuan. Yang Ziyuan swam desperately to the side. Don't worry about me, I can swim by myself. Chapter 507. In just a moment, Yang Ziyuan was already 3 to 4 feet away from Jiyu Ziyan and Rong Yang. Brother Ziyan, let's go, let's go. She can swim by herself. If we delay any longer, we will all die. Woo-woo, I don't want to die. Rong Yang cried beside Jiyu Ziyan. Jiyu Ziyan choked. If he tried to pull Yang Ziyuan, he was afraid that it would be too late. While he was distracted, Yang Ziyuan had already disappeared into the darkness and could no longer be seen. Ziyuan. Ziyuan. He couldn't help but shout. At this moment, Jiyu Ziyan seemed to have lost his soul. Jiyu Ziyan wanted to chase after her, but he lost sight of her. For a moment, he didn't know which direction to go. The monster is coming. Rong Yang's voice changed. Let's go, Jiyu Ziyan sighed. he could only swim forward with all his might. Yang Ziyuan swam forward aimlessly. The lightning in the sky was getting denser and denser. One after another, it lit up the surroundings. She saw that Jiyu Xian and Rong Yang were only 2 black dots. She also saw that the monster first caught up with young Master Zhao. Poor young Master Zhao didn't even have time to scream before he was dragged into the water, never to come up again. After a moment, the 2 dorsal fins chased in her direction, getting closer and closer. She knew that she was finished. Although her martial arts were not low, but compared to young Master Zhao, she was still lacking. Even he didn't have the strength to fight back. How could she? Being eaten was only a matter of moments. Yang Ziyuan's heart was in despair. She simply stopped swimming and closed her eyes slightly. Yi Feng, you don't care about me anymore. I'm going to die, buried in the belly of a fish. You don't even have to prepare a coffin for me. The black dorsal fins were getting closer and closer, so close that she could clearly see the sharp teeth in their mouths. With a splash of water, her legs were forcefully pushed open, as if she was riding on something. She was shocked and subconsciously looked down, only to find that she was riding on the back of a big fish. The dark blue crystal fish scales were under her. Almost instinctively, she hugged the fish's body, and the big fish carried her forward quickly. This scene was simply like a dream. When the big fish scuttled close to the surface of the water, it brought up waves that splashed onto her face, making her unable to open her eyes. She could only desperately lie on its body, tightly hugging the fins on its back. In a daze, only one thought flashed through her mind: there was actually a fish that came to save her. She had actually encountered a plot that would only appear in a legendary novel. The sound of water was deafening. She couldn't hear or see anything. She just hugged it with all her might. She didn't notice that the dark clouds in the originally dark sky above her head had dispersed, and she didn't notice that the big fish below her had slowed down and finally stopped. Master, there is really a shaman. I didn't expect that there would be a shaman in the chaotic river. Ah, it's carrying a person on its back. A voice suddenly sounded in front of her. The voice was crisp and pleasant, but very unfamiliar. Yang Ziyuan slowly raised her eyes dizzily. When she saw the person in front of her, she couldn't help but raise her hand to rub her eyes. Not far in front of her, there was a big bird suspended in the air, with blue satin feathers, a long vermilion beak, a phoenix feather crown, and a long tail feathers. Qing Luan. The legendary Qing Luan. On the back of Qing Luan stood 2 people. Chapter 508. One of the 2 was a 15 or 16-year-old girl with a delicate and pretty face. She should be the disciple. The other looked like a 20-year-old woman, but her dress was a bit strange. Ordinary women wore skirts, but she wore a white robe, an extremely wide white robe like snow. This white-robed woman's long hair was loose and flying behind her. The corners of her eyes were slightly raised, and her eyebrows were elegant and beautiful. However, she looked cold and unapproachable. She was very beautiful, as if she was a beauty carved out of snow. On this continent, there was no one else who could ride such an eye-catching divine bird, only the leader of bright reverence religion, Yi Qingwan. Yang Ziyuan stared at her for a moment. Her heart was so nervous that it almost jumped out. She hurriedly saluted, "Senior Yi." Yi Qingwan looked at her from above. To be exact, she was looking at the big fish under her body. Her eyes moved slightly. Sure enough, it's sharkmen. Soon after, Yang Ziyuan felt her body was as light as a feather, and she fell on the riverbank. The big fish under her body automatically left the water and flew towards Yi Qingwan's back. It was only at this moment that Yang Ziyuan saw clearly what the big fish that had been carrying her looked like. How was this a big fish? It was clearly a merman. It was the size of 2 adults. Its whole body was dark blue. Above its chest, it had the streamlined shape of a fish. Above its chest, it was a human. Its long blue algae-like hair was scattered all over its body, making Yang Ziyuan unable to see its face. There was a long wound on its tail, which was still dripping blood. A merman. A legendary merman. She didn't expect that the one who saved her life this time was actually such a beautiful merman. Her heart began to thump wildly. She turned over and was about to get up. Put him down. She always felt that this merman was the most important person to her. Unfortunately, She had seriously overdrawn her strength in the water. Just as she stood up, she fell down with a plop. There were sharp stones beneath her, and her leg was also injured. Yi Qinghuan lightly glanced at her, raised her sleeve, and threw down a medicine bottle. "Eat it, it can increase your power by 10 years, consider it your reward." Her voice was also cold, with a chill like ice and snow. It made Yang Ziyuan's heart shrink. Yi Qinghuan was obviously the kind of person who didn't talk to mortals. After she finished speaking, she patted the head of the blue Luan phoenix. The blue Luan phoenix flapped its wings and turned into a black dot in the sky. Her savior, no, her savior fish. Yang Ziyuan staggered 2 steps forward, then stopped dejectedly. Looking around, there were piles of rocks and gravel everywhere. Chaos River? 1,000 li away. She had heard of the chaotic river before. It was more than 1,000 miles away from Daliang City where she lived. She didn't expect that the merman would bring her here after a night of flying, thinking of Ning Shuamore who was kidnapped by the red-clothed Evildor, thinking of Yi Feng, and then thinking of the merman who was taken away by Yi Qinghuan. Yang Ziyuan only felt like a fire was burning in her heart. Ning Shuamore would suffer greatly if she fell into the hands of the red-clothed pervert. Yi Feng's life and death were unknown. As for the mermaid, no one knew what fate it would have if it fell into Yi Qinghuan's hands. After all, the legendary mermaid's entire body was a treasure. The mermaid's tears were even rarer, and the mermaid's skin was said to be able to make people glow with youth and moisturize their skin. Yi Qinghuan didn't take the merman away to skin it, right? Chapter 509. Yang Ziyuan quivered and shivered in fear. She kicked the bottle of medicine that Yi Qinghuan had thrown far away. That sharkman had saved her life and was already her friend. She would not accept this bottle of medicine and would not betray her friend. She picked a direction and ran. She wanted to get help. She wanted to find that Han Shanyu. However, the chaotic river was 2,000 miles away from the capital of Chang Kong country. It would take her at least 3 days to get there. Would she be able to make it in time? Ning Shuamore and Xue Yilan had known each other for a long time. She had finally seen how he displayed his martial arts. She only had a few words to comment on this. Damn it, he was indeed not human. This bastard carried her away from the ship and glided on the surface of the water. His sleeves fluttered like a fire lotus blooming in the dark night. From time to time, the heads of monsters would pop out from the turbid water, but the moment they saw him, they would avoid him. Xue Yilan's speed was too fast, and the surroundings were too dark. Ning Shuamore, who was in his embrace, felt as if she was dancing on the edge of a cliff in the middle of the night. She was on tenterhooks, afraid that in the next moment, she would fall into an abyss or hit a huge rock, causing her to crash and die. His speed was at least 200 miles per hour, right? Even if they were on the highway, it was still seriously over the speed limit. Once they hit something, they would be smashed into pieces. What was worse was that he did not have any shelter. The hurricane in front of him made it hard for him to open his eyes. Even though Ning Shuamore was nestled in his arms, the hurricane blew so hard that her skin felt like it was being torn apart. It was very painful. Especially her injured back, which happened to be leaning against the wind. When the hurricane blew on her wound, it was as if there was a knife cutting into her body inch by inch. She was in so much pain that her face turned pale. Where the hell was this bastard taking her? Were the people on the ship really out of danger? This bastard didn't kill Yi Feng in the end, right? Where did that little Cheline who always dropped the ball at the most crucial moment run off to? She originally had a telepathic connection with the little Cheline and could roughly sense the other party's mood and distance. But ever since this red-clothed Evildor appeared, the telepathic connection between her and the little Cheline seemed to have been cut off. She could no longer sense it. Presumably, Kirine couldn't sense her presence either. Her acupoints were sealed and she couldn't even speak. He could only grit his teeth and bear with it. Xue Yilan seemed to have sensed the stiffness of her body. He looked down at her and asked, "Are you afraid?" His voice sounded ethereal in the hurricane. At this moment, she could no longer be afraid. Ning Shuamore had also thrown caution to the wind. At worst, she would die. What was there to be afraid of? She ignored him. Meow, she was not afraid of death, but the living torture was hard to bear. The wound on her back was so painful that she was scratching her heart and liver. Before the cold sweat could seep out, it was blown dry by the wind. Shwe Elan glanced at the wound on her back and a touch of anger rose from the bottom of his eyes. Suddenly, he sneered. Not only did he not slow down, he even sped up. In an instant, he reached 300 miles per hour. The hurricane was like a knife. Ning Shuamore couldn't even breathe. Her vision turned black and she finally succeeded in passing out. Kireen was about to go crazy. It had only been separated from its master for a short while. It had only run to the kitchen of the largest restaurant in Daliang City to have a feast. Suddenly, it lost contact with its master. The chef in the restaurant was really good to this blue cat. He fed it many specialty snacks. It ate until its little belly was round and it forgot about everything else. Chapter 5:10. When Kireen thought of its master and wanted to sense her, it couldn't sense her anymore. It was so shocked that it didn't have time to wait for the lotus root pink meatballs that were about to be taken out of the pot by the chef. It ran away as fast as it could. It remembered that the last time it sensed its master, she was on a boat. However, Daliang City was a city on the water. There were many lakes and even more boats. Which boat was she on? Due to the broken connection, it couldn't sense how far away she was. It could only search blindly. It first went to a few lakes in the city and sniffed at the shore of those lakes. If it couldn't smell anything, it would immediately move to the next spot. Therefore, the people strolling by the lake would occasionally see such a scene. A blue cat was running around on the shore like crazy. It flew like lightning and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was so fast that those who saw it felt like they had seen a ghost. Or they thought they were seeing things. It was a water Kireen and was naturally sensitive to water. Therefore, it didn't need to ask for directions and could find the next lake by instinct. After searching 3 or 4 lakes with this method, it finally remembered that the last time it contacted its master, there seemed to be the sound of a zither next to her. What kind of boat would have the sound of a zither? Kireen had too little social experience and couldn't remember at the moment. However, it had a solution. It stopped an elegant young man by the lakeside, stood upright, and asked, "Excuse me, what ship would have the sound of a zither?" The gentleman thought that the little blue cat with smooth fur was cute. Seeing that it was stopping him, he thought it was funny and bent down to pick it up. The moment it opened its mouth, the young master was so scared that he fell over. He sat on the ground and said, "Grandpa, cats can talk. I'm not a cat." Kireen was angry and wanted to slap him with its paw. However, it thought that it wasn't the time to be calculative, so it held back and said, "Tell me, what kind of boat would have the sound of a zither?" Although the gentleman was not brave, he was a frequent visitor to brothels. He tried to hold back his shivering and answered, "Usually, the girls on the flower boats would play the zither often." Flower boats? Boats that transport flowers? Kireen didn't quite understand. Cough. No, it's a place for men to have fun. There are many beautiful girls on the ship. Kireen's eyes lit up. Although it didn't know what a place for men was, it felt that the beautiful girl, whose owner was the beautiful girl, must be on some kind of flower boat. So it humbly asked what kind of boat was called a flower boat and what were its characteristics. When the man saw a cat asking about this, he was shocked, scared, and a little amused, so he told it the detailed characteristics of the flower boat. Kireen memorized it and turned around to look for the flower boat. The so-called flower boats were actually those beautiful pleasure boats. There were usually colorful gauze fluttering outside and red lanterns hanging at the bow of the boat. Sure enough, the sound of a zither could often be heard from these ships. Kireen first wandered around the lake, sniffing for the scent of its master. As long as Ning Shuamore stayed by the lake, it would be able to find her. Its search speed was not slow, but there were too many lakes in and outside the city. By the time it finally found Thousand Bright Lake, nearly 4 hours had passed. It finally smelled Ning Shuamore's scent and immediately began to search for the flower boat on the lake. Chapter 5:11. Sure enough, there were many beautiful girls on the boat, but none of them was its owner. Moreover, these girls were dressed more boldly than their owners. They walked awkwardly with their butts swaying. Some of them even exposed their snow-white bellies. These girls were also more open than their owners. They often clung tightly to the men or even snuggled into their arms, using their lips to feed the men. Kareen felt disgusted when he saw this. Those ugly, handsome, old, and young men all had a look of enjoyment on their faces. Their palms were caressing the girls' bodies, making the girls giggle. Kareen was puzzled as he did not know what they were doing. However, he did not care about that at this time. Every time he got on a boat, he would search the entire boat. No one paid special attention to him as he scurried around the boat. It was also very convenient for him to search. The scenery on these boats was actually quite similar. He even saw a man and a woman lying on a big bed in the room of a boat. They had taken off their clothes and were fighting there. The woman was obviously at a disadvantage. She kept gasping for breath. No, no, ouch, it hurts. Please. Please let me go. However, the man did not have the slightest intention of letting go. He held onto the woman tightly, his waist shaking, and used his stomach to slap the woman. He even said fiercely, "Little Demonis, today I must kill you, you little Demonis." Kareen originally thought that it was a little strange for them to take off their clothes and fight. He paused for a moment and took a few more glances. When he heard what the man said, he was immediately furious. It was already infuriating for a man to bully a weak woman, but he actually wanted to kill the other party. That was too embarrassing for men. In anger, he pounced on the man's back. He stretched out his sharp claws and scratched the man's back fiercely. That man was having a good time when he suddenly got scratched. He screamed and immediately went limp. With his back full of blood, he jumped up. Damn, what is this? Damn, where did this fierce cat come from? Kareen opened his eyes wide and warned sternly, "If you bully a woman again, I will bite you to death." God. Cat demon. The cat has become a demon. The man and woman in the room screamed. Kareen had no time to waste with them. After warning them, he flew out of the window. Chaos ensued on the ship. A moment later, everyone on the ship was looking for the talking cat. Kareen, on the other hand, had already jumped onto another flower boat and began its journey to find its master. Not long after, some people on the ship were also scratched by the ferocious cats, and chaos ensued. Kareen was very depressed. It had seen men bullying women on several of the brothel boats today, and they were in all kinds of positions. After it scratched the men, the women who were being bullied also screamed and looked for sticks to hit it. He simply didn't know what was good for him. These flower boats were connected to each other. In less than an hour, all the flower boats in the lake knew about the cat demon. They were all looking for the blue cat that had caused trouble. When the little Chelene boarded the boat again, it wasn't as smooth. Just like now, when it had just jumped onto a flower boat, it was immediately chased down by the turtle slave who was on guard against the demonic cat with a big stick. Those people chased it so fiercely that it had no choice but to jump into the water. Chapter 5:12. Kareen felt that it was too slow to swim in the water, so it decided to fly on the surface of the water, which attracted screams from the surrounding boats. Some people even started to shoot at it with arrows and threw stones at it. Kareen deeply felt that the people on the flower boats were too unfriendly. Why would its master board this kind of boat? Which boat was she on? What kind of danger was she in? Could it be that she was being bullied by a man like what it saw on the boat? It was flying gloomily and accidentally bumped into someone's arms. With a loud bang, it was knocked into the ground, causing it to feel dizzy. "Why are you running around? Where is your master?" A voice like ice and snow came from above its head. Kareen's body stiffened. This was the voice that it feared the most. All its fur stood up. It suddenly raised its head and looked into a pair of beautiful deep blue eyes. Han Shan-yu. Han Shan-yu was also floating on the water, his moonlight robe fluttering behind him. Why is he here? The reason why his master ran away was to escape from him. Kareen's eyes widened. Its mouth opened so wide that a duck egg could be stuffed in. Han Shanyu frowned. Speak. Where is your master? On the flower boat. Karin's brain was still in a state of paralysis, so it subconsciously answered. She actually boarded the flower boat? This girl was simply unrestrained when she did things. Was there any place that she did not dare to go? Which one? These 3 words came out of his mouth coldly. I don't know. I am also looking. I have looked for many boats. Karin was inexplicably pressured by his body and stuttered. Is the telepathy between you and her fake? Why don't you ask her? Han Shanyue's body seemed to be even colder. I can't sense her. I don't know who cut it off. I can't sense her. Could she have died? Woo woo woo. The little Chelene was anxious and scared, and its eyes were filled with tears. Shut up. If she is dead, do you think you can still live? Han Shanyu was almost defeated by this stupid Kirin. Did it think that the blood contract was fake? Was the function of the blood contract just to fool it? The little Chelene finally remembered the matter of the blood contract. That's right, it was still alive and well. This proved that its master was also alive. No, it couldn't sense her now. Did someone break the blood contract between it and its master? Its eyes were too transparent, and almost all of its questions were written in them. Han Shanyu immediately understood and reassured it. Stupid. This blood contract wasn't something that anyone could undo. Also, even if there is such an expert, both you and Ning Shuamore have to be present. The little Chelene was relieved, but it was still a little puzzled. It looked at Han Shanyu in astonishment. You are quite familiar with the blood contract. It suddenly had an epiphany. My blood contract with Master couldn't have been established by you, right? Han Shanyue's eyes flashed. Who said that this little guy was stupid? It was quite smart sometimes. He was too lazy to answer it and only asked what he wanted to know. How did you and your master get separated? How did you know she was on the flower boat? Tell me the simple process. Kirin also knew that it was important to find its master now, so it quickly told him what happened after it broke up with its master. Han Shanyu finally understood what Kirin meant when it said that Ning Shuamore was on the flower boat. I saw a lot of men, a lot of women, and also a lot of things to eat and play, that's all? That's it. Is there anything else? Little Chelene's eyes widened. However, it seemed to have forgotten something. Han Shanyue's face finally showed some satisfaction. He nodded slightly and ignored it and continued to calculate. Kirin looked at his fingers. His fingers were so beautiful, as if they were carved out of jade. There were no flaws at all. Master, you really know how to tell fortunes? Kirin looked at him as if he was a fraud. In its eyes, fortune tellers were all frauds. Chapter 514. Han Shanyu did not even bother to look at it. Is my master really a loner? Is she really that unlucky? Han Shanyue's voice was calm. My fortune has never been wrong. Although he had his own selfish reasons for saying that she was a loner, he was not wrong. That girl was indeed a loner, and not just a loner, but also, she is really a loner. Kirin lowered its head. It thought that Han Shanyu was just fooling it. Then she really can't marry in the future? Han Shanyu finally looked at it as if he was looking at an idiot. Didn't I say that I would marry her? Aren't you afraid that she will jinx you? My life is harder than hers. I am not afraid of jinx. Ah, so you are marrying her because of this? Just to accept her? Not to let her be alone for the rest of her life? You can say that. So you are so kind. Kirin was touched and could not help but sigh. Master, are there many loners in this world? If there are many of them, and they are all women, how many concubines do you have to marry? Han Shanyu was speechless. He could not help but feel speechless. It was as if he was picking up trash. Was he such a busybody? He had traveled the world for so many years, and he had seen many loners. But the only one that attracted his attention was Ning Shuamore. He did not want to chat with this silly and naive Kirin anymore, so he coldly said, not every piece of trash I like to accept. Kirine opened its eyes wide and said angrily, "My master is an elite. No, an elite, not a piece of trash. Oh right, you said that your life is hard. Are you also a loner? Or the most powerful loner?" It seemed to have suddenly realized something. "No wonder my master did not want to marry you. She must be afraid that you will jinx her to death. My master is really wise." Han Shanyu was speechless. He had the urge to kick this little Cheline into the lake. Could that girl really escape? No one had ever escaped from his grasp. "Master." The 8 subordinates came back one after another. They all bowed to him and told him what they had heard. 2 hours ago, there was indeed an official Guqin recital. All of the high-ranking Guqin players in Daliang City participated, including the young mistress of the Yang clan. It was said that the young mistress had a Guqin player named Xue Xue with her, whose talents shocked everyone. An hour ago, there was a thick fog on the lake. Some people on the small boats saw the magnificent ship sailing into the thick fog. Later on, the fog dispersed, but no one saw the ship again. Because the lake was very large and wide, and there were many bends and forks, the ships could not always see each other. Therefore, the disappearance of the ship did not attract much attention. However, the 8 guards had searched every corner of the lake, but they couldn't find any trace of the ship. It was as if the ship had disappeared into thin air. Kirine was shocked. Did the ship sail into the space-time hole? Han Shanyu glanced at it, and Kirine immediately said, "This is what my master told me." She said that in some mysterious places where she came from, ships and planes would often disappear for no reason. Some people guessed that they might have entered the space-time hole. It is another space-time hole. In response to Kirine's worries, Han Shanyu only commented, "She is dreaming, and you are not awake either." Chapter 5:15. Han Shanyue's gaze turned to the 8 guards. Before the ship disappeared, was there anything strange on the lake? One of the guards said, "It was a bit strange." The people who saw the ship said they didn't see anything strange. But they seemed to be a bit confused. They all said that after the ship disappeared, they had a headache and seemed to have forgotten something. Han Shanyu clenched his fingers. The memory erasing technique. He thought that he was the only one who knew how to use it. He didn't expect there to be a second person. The image of the red-clothed Evildor, Xue Ilan, flashed across his mind. His eyes were cold. Before this, did they see a man in red? The other guard thought for a while and said, "There was indeed a person who said that when the zither music was beautiful on the big ship, a man in red came on a small boat and played an even more beautiful zither music." However, the person who said this was a half-drunk man, and the others thought that he was talking nonsense. No one believed him. It was him. He didn't expect that guy to chase him all the way here. Did he and Shuamore meet on purpose, or was it just a coincidence? The Guqin souls of the Guqin players on the ship should be enough for that bastard to repair his Guqin, and Ning Shuamore, if she fell into his hands, how would he treat her? Would it be, after instructing the 8 guards, his figure flashed and floated towards the direction where the ship had disappeared? He had to find an abnormal aura in that area of the water to deduce what kind of technique Xue Ilan had used to transport the ship away, as well as the possible destination of the ship. Kirine jumped up when it heard the 2 words red-clothed. It followed Han Shanyu closely. Master fell into the hands of that red-clothed pervert again. God, that pervert always had bad intentions towards her. He will kill her. Oh no, oh no. That red-clothed pervert who bites the hand that feeds him is after my master. Will he fry my master first and then kill her? As soon as the last few words came out of its mouth, its 4 paws suddenly staggered and fell into the lake with a splash. Han Shanyue's cold voice sounded, "Little apple, if I hear you speak rudely again, I will fry you first and then fry you." Kirine emerged from the water and wiped the water droplets off his face with his claws. Since when did it speak rudely and use random words? Wasn't it supposed to be fried first and then killed? Instead, he killed them first before frying them. It seemed to be more reliable to kill before frying. Only after killing can you fry it, right? However, it seemed to have overheard its master saying something about frying first and then killing. Not knowing the word, he went to ask Tom. Tom's explanation was that he would fry them after killing them. It raised its head and saw that Han Shanyu had already drifted away. It hurriedly followed him. Chapter 5:16. We have to hurry. Give me a general direction and I'll use my nose to find her. My nose is very sensitive. Master can't stay in his hands for too long, or else she will be at a disadvantage. Kirin said hurriedly. Shut up, don't be noisy. Han Shanyu shouted to stop its nagging. His heart was in a mess because of its noise. He had dealt with many demons in his life, so he was used to being calm. No matter what happened, he could plan in an orderly manner to deal a fatal blow to the enemy. Only this time, his heart was in a mess. The worst thing to do at this moment was to be in a mess. Although the little girl was a troublemaker, she was smart enough to hold on for a while. He would rush to save her. Kirin felt that it was about to smoke from its anxiety. Looking at Han Shanyue's calm and steady manner, it was also angry. This person was really heartless to its little master, right? Master was in the bad guy's hands, but he was not worried at all. But why was its master facing so many disasters? She was walking on the edge of danger every day, without a moment of peace. It accidentally muttered this sentence out loud. Han Shanyu finally looked at it and said lightly, she has a blade in her life, so naturally she will face disasters at every step. Is there any way to solve it? Kirin felt that it might be good to listen to the trickster's words. Master should change her luck. She needs to find a strong backing. Han Shanyu said. Strong backing? Kirin blinked its big eyes and suddenly had an epiphany. I know. Master should go to the Sun-Moon sect to become a disciple. Now the Sun-Moon sect is the strongest. All the sects are afraid of it. If she can become a disciple of the Sun-Moon sect, maybe no one will dare to find trouble with her. She can also live a peaceful life. Han Shanyu was speechless. His eyes were unreadable. Little apple, do you think I'm not strong enough? If that girl stayed by his side, all these would not have happened. But she wanted to escape. Kirin looked at him seriously. You are indeed strong, but master is not willing to be anyone's concubine. She said it was an insult to herself. If she enters the Sun-Moon sect, she will at most be a disciple. No one will make her a concubine. Han Shanyu raised his eyebrows and pursed his lips. You don't want to be a concubine? Are you willing to be my disciple? However, he had set a rule that he would no longer accept female disciples. Was he going to break the rules for her again? He seemed to have broken too many rules for her. Kirin, on the other hand, seemed to have suddenly found a broad path for his master. He immediately beamed with joy. The venerable emperor of the Sun-Moon sect thinks highly of my master. Perhaps he will personally take her as his disciple. It was said that the ancestor was extremely protective of his disciples and would not allow anyone to bully them. As long as little mistress can become his disciple, everyone will give face to the ancestor and won't dare to make trouble for her. Han Shanyu glanced at it lightly. The ancestor thinks highly of her? Why don't I know about it? You're not omnipotent, so of course you don't know. Thinking back to when my master was almost executed in a public square, it was the ancestor who personally stepped in and saved her. I heard that the ancestor doesn't meddle in other people's business, but for the first time, he stood up for my master. It's clear that he values my master very much. Han Shanyu was speechless. Indeed, he did not like to meddle in the affairs of the mortal world. That day, he did not know why, but he seemed to have a sudden impulse. Chapter 5:17. Also, Di Zun has no regard for mortals, but when he was in the palace, he took pity on my little mistress. He was afraid that she would be frozen by his cold air, so he let her out for the first time. Kirin continued to list. This was what he had heard from the servants when he was in the Marquis's mansion. Han Shanyue's eyes flashed slightly, but he still did not speak. Moreover, the ancestor never gossiped about people, but when he left Vast Sky Empire, he solemnly told the old emperor about my master. The little Chelin gave the third example. Han Shanyu raised his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. This third time was indeed intentional. He just wanted to take advantage of that girl's rotten peach blossom. Out of the 3 examples, only the last one was slightly more reliable. Tell me, don't you think the ancestor values my family's little master? The little Cheline confidently concluded. Han Shanyu smiled slightly. After hearing what you said, it seems to be the case. Why don't you encourage your little mistress to go to the Sun Moon sect and become a disciple? Di Zun can indeed protect her to grow up safely. Let's see if he will accept your mistress. I heard that he only accepts a disciple once every 80 years. It has only been 40 years, so it's not time for him to accept a disciple. Also, he doesn't accept female disciples. Rules are set by people, so naturally, they can be changed. My little mistress is so smart, Di Zun will definitely accept her. Karine was full of confidence. Then, I will wait and see. Han Shanyu picked it up from the water and pointed at it. Karine involuntarily returned to its original form. Han Shanyu jumped on its back and said, everything can wait until we save your mistress. Go to the chaotic river. Karine's eyes lit up. It tore open its 4 hooves and began to run. After running for a few feet, it asked embarrassedly, where is the Wantan River? Han Shanyu. His voice was cold. Looks like she really wants to raise you into a cat. A Cheline beast actually doesn't know the distribution of rivers in this continent. Karine was afraid of him and did not dare to answer at this time. Han Shanyu pointed out the path for it and threw it a map. He said coldly, within 3 days, memorize this map completely. I will check your homework. Karine. No, it hated reading books, and it hated memorizing books even more. Master, where are you? When Ning Shuamore woke up, she found herself in a dilapidated temple. The sky outside was still dark. Looking out of the broken window, he could only see a few scattered stars. It was very dark in the dilapidated temple. If Ning Shuamore's psychokinesis hadn't reached a certain level and could see things in the dark, she might not have been able to see anything at this moment. He didn't know which deity was worshipped in the dilapidated temple. Most of the golden paint on the statue had been peeled off. Under the statue was a small table, and below it were a few praying mats. She was lying on a string of praying mats. The praying mats were rough, and although she was wrapped in a red robe, she still felt flustered. In particular, the wound on his back was burning with pain. When Yi Feng took her as a hostage, he looked fierce, but in fact, he knew when to stop. At that time, the sword had only pierced through her skin and did not injure her vitals. If it was handled properly, it wouldn't even need to be bandaged. But now, it hurt so much. It must have been cut by the hurricane when he carried her away. Shui Ilan didn't know what medicine he gave her, but her head was still a little dizzy. Although she was awake, her vision was blurry. Chapter 518. There seemed to be some movement behind her. Ning Shuamore turned around and secretly clenched her fist. Shui Ilan was sitting on a praying mat not far behind her. His eyes were slightly closed. It was a posture of meditation, as if he was meditating. In the night, his face was a little pale. His originally rosy lips were also a little dry and dull. He was injured. Ning Shuamore was overjoyed and quietly stood up. Not bad, her acupuncture points were unsealed. She could move freely. She slightly activated the psychokinesis in her body, but she couldn't feel it. She looked at Shui Ilan unkindly. Needless to say, this bastard sealed her psychokinesis again. Damn it. When she didn't have any psychokinesis, everyone called her a good-for-nothing. Now that she had cultivated a little, whoever caught her would seal it. Her psychokinesis had no place to be used. In this world, martial prowess was indeed the way of the king. One day, she would become the king of this world. She would definitely seal up all these people who had dragged her around and let them have a taste of being bullied and humiliated by others. She stood up and didn't do anything else. She was like a cat hibernating in the dark, silently observing her opponent's reaction. Shui Ilan didn't move. This bastard was usually as alert as a snake. Now that he was so quiet, could it be that he was seriously injured? Or was he testing her again? Ning Xuemore tried to walk towards the door. She had already opened the door of the rundown temple. The night wind blew in and caused Shui Yilan's clothes to flutter. Shui Yilan still didn't move. This bastard was seriously injured. Ning Xuemore's eyes flashed with a murderous intent. This bastard had been following her like a ghost, trying to kill her from time to time. If he didn't die, she would never have a day of peace. She might as well take this rare opportunity to get rid of him. She turned back. She walked casually, as if she was just at the door to take a look at the scenery. All the weapons on her had been taken away by Shui Yilan. Her psychokinesis was also sealed. She was barehanded, so it was impossible for her to kill him. Shui Yilan must be thinking the same thing. That was why after sealing her psychokinesis, he sat there and calmly meditated. He didn't guard against her anymore. In the dark, Ning Xuemore's lips slightly hooked up. She slowly approached Shui Yilan, without the slightest murderous intent. Shui Yilan didn't guard against her and didn't react to her approach. Just as she was about to reach him, Ning Xuemore tapped the ground with the tip of her foot, and her body shot out. A pair of shabby chopsticks appeared in her palm, which she then stabbed towards Shui Yilan's temple. Although her psychokinesis was sealed, she still had her inner strength. Although her inner strength could not be used as a hidden weapon like the legendary flying leaves and picking flowers, it was still quite profound. When she attacked, it was as fast as lightning. Although it was just 2 broken chopsticks, its power was not inferior to a sharp sword. Agile and elegant, natural and smooth. This move was perfect. As long as Shui Yilan was stabbed by her chopsticks, he would become a bloody gourd. Seeing that the chopsticks were about to pierce his head, her wrist suddenly tightened and a strand of black hair wrapped around her arm. Her wrist hurt and her hand lost strength, causing the chopsticks to fall to the ground. Then her waist tightened and the world spun around her. By the time she reacted, she was already lying on the ground with Shui Yilan's entire body pressing down on her. This time, he hit the wound on her back. Her face turned pale and she couldn't help but gasp. Chapter 519. However, she paused mid-air and stared wide-eyed at Shui Yilan's handsome face that was suddenly closing in on her. She was so nervous that her body stiffened. Shui Yilan's eyes shone brightly in the night. He didn't look injured at all. You pretended to be injured on purpose? Ning Xuemore glared at him. She cursed this bastard in her heart for being crazy. If he wanted to kill her now, it would be easier than killing an ant. Why did he pretend to be injured to test her? He wanted to see if she would do anything to him. He wanted to see if she couldn't bear to do that to him. Was he crazy? How could she not bear to do that to him? She was simply too heartless. Was there even a need to test her? Shui Yilan's breath was right next to her face. It was warm and carried a faint fragrance, making all the hairs on Ning Xuemore's body stand up. She struggled a bit, wanting to send him flying with a kick. However, her body was firmly restrained by him and she couldn't move at all. She could only watch as his handsome face came closer and closer. It was so close that it was already touching her earlobe. Little Xuemore, so you hate me so much that you want to kill me whenever you have the chance. There was a hint of grievance in his voice. Ning Xuemore looked at him with a "Are you crazy?" look. She couldn't be bothered to reply to him. How can you bear to do that to me when I'm so nice to you? Shui Yilan turned on his resentful wife mode. It was a success. Ning Xuemore had goosebumps all over her body. You're nice to me. Ning Xuemore was furious. I released you from the coffin. Not only are you not grateful, you've even tried to harm me time and time again. I almost lost my life in your hands a few times. Is this being nice to me? What will happen if you don't treat me well? Little Xuemore, we have to be refined people. Don't be so rude. Shui Yilan stroked her lips with his finger. Isn't your little life still fine in your body? Look, you're still alive and kicking even now. Yelling at me and plotting against me. I don't even want to bicker with you. You should know that those who have offended me usually end up being skinned alive, but I can't bring myself to do it to you. Isn't this good for you? Ning Shuamore really wanted to laugh at him. Was not skinning and breaking the bones of his savior a kind person? This was simply demonic logic. She did not want to pay any more attention to him. He simply closed his eyes. Suddenly, his eyelashes heated up. His voice was low and teasing. Little Shuamore, your expression. Are you inviting me to bed you? Ning Shuamore's body stiffened. She quickly opened her eyes to look at him and replied, go to hell. This bastard looked refined, but he actually said such words. Even if I die, I will die under the peony flower. Shui Yilan's eyes gradually deepened. At this moment, their bodies were tightly pressed against each other. Ning Shuamore could even feel the heat of his body, as well as the obvious male changes in his body. Her heart beat rapidly. In a panic, she couldn't help but grasp at the life-saving straw. Shui Yilan, you can't be so perverted. I'm only 13 years old. Your body is already 18 years old. It can withstand the nourishment of a man's rain and dew. Shui Yilan's palm had already begun to caress her back. Moreover, I also like delicate bodies. Even if you're really 13 years old, you're still very much to my liking. Don't worry, I'll be very gentle with you. You'll taste the most extreme ecstasy. His hand that was wandering around her back was like a poisonous snake. Ning Shuamore's nervous fingers also stiffened. She suddenly had an epiphany and shouted, Blackwave zither. Chapter 520. As expected, Shui Yilan's body stiffened. He squinted his eyes. What's wrong with the Blackwave zither? The person who gave you the Blackwave zither was a woman, right? Your sweetheart. You must love her very much. You can't do anything to betray her. Ning Shuamore guessed randomly. She felt that Shui Yilan's attitude towards the Blackwave zither was unusual. When he hugged it, it was as if he was hugging his lover. Shui Yilan pressed on her body, but he didn't do anything else. He looked down at her. His green eyes were dark, as if he was looking at someone else through her. Ning Shuamore held her breath slightly. She tried her best to be gentle. She didn't want to provoke him and make him go wild again. After a while, he sighed softly. A look of approval flashed across his eyes. Little Shuamore, what you said might be true. The Blackwave zither was hers, but I forgot about her. Ning Shuamore. What was going on? Why was she so confused when she heard this? Shui Yilan's fingers touched her lips again. I can't remember her appearance, I can't remember anything about her. But I feel that I should love her very much. She sealed me in a coffin. I should hate her to death. Isn't this like what you humans call love and hate? He lost his memory about that woman. So he couldn't love and hate her. Was that abnormal? You can try to find her. Maybe you'll remember everything when you find her. Ning Shuamore guided him patiently. I don't know how to find her. I can't even remember her identity. That's okay. Since she could seal you, her psychokinesis must be very high. She must be a famous person on this continent. You can try to ask around. Or you can wander around with this zither. If you say it's hers, she might come to find you when she hears the sound of the zither. Shui Yilan tilted his head and looked at her. You're thinking for me? Of course, I hope that the two of you can resolve all your grudges. Look, when she sealed you, she clearly left you a way out. Clearly, she isn't completely heartless towards you. Perhaps you did something wrong to her, which made her hate you so much that she sealed you. You see, even if you've forgotten her, she's still there in your subconscious. You two are a pair of lovers. As long as you find her, you might be able to resolve all the misunderstandings and live happily ever after with her. Ning Shuamore tried her best to draw out a beautiful blueprint for him. She tried her best to find something for him to do so that he would not always find trouble with her as if he had nothing better to do. What you said makes sense. Shui Yilan nodded. It seemed that he agreed with her. Ning Shuamore was secretly delighted. She continued, of course what I said makes sense. Let me go first. You know that girls are very narrow-minded when it comes to love. They can't tolerate even a grain of sand. The most intolerable thing was for a lover to be two-timing. If you really love her and want to get her back, you should keep your chastity for her. Girls are very particular about this. Shui Ilan's expression was a little strange. He looked at her and suddenly said something shocking. Why do I feel like you're her? Ning Xuemo secretly rolled her eyes. How could that be? I'm not her. The person who sealed you must be a genius, and I'm so weak. Ning Xuemo tried to reason with him. Damn it, if she was that woman, she would have sealed this bastard 800 times already. Why would she need to talk so much nonsense with him? But I have a special feeling for you. I always feel that you're the person I should be closest to. Shui Ilan's fingers stroked her long eyelashes again. Chapter 521. It's an illusion. It's definitely an illusion, Ning Xuemo said seriously. I think you've been locked in a coffin for thousands of years, so your brain has gone haywire. You have the mentality of a chick towards the person who let you out. Shui Ilan frowned. What do you mean by haywire? Haywire means that your brain is a bit slow. You don't have to think too much about this. You have to catch the main point of my words. The main point of my words is the mentality of a chick. Shui Ilan smiled faintly. You mean that I'm close to you because I see you as my mother? His tone was faintly unfriendly. Ning Xuemo immediately said seriously, it's just a metaphor, just a metaphor. You're at least thousands of years old, and I'm only 13. You definitely don't see me as your mother. Damn it, if I had a son like you, I'd definitely smash you against the wall. This metaphor is quite fresh. Shui Ilan's eyes were deep. Little Xuemo, you're quite talkative today. You're still so considerate towards me. Do you like me? I like you, my ass. Ning Xuemo looked at him with watery eyes. I just hope that lovers can find their way together. You and her should be a match made in heaven. Lovers can find their way together? Haha, what a good lovers can find their way together. Little Xuemo, you're really a lovely person. I find that I like you even more. He lowered his head and kissed her on the nose. Why don't you be my co-wife in the future? Ning Xuemo was speechless. This bastard's brain circuits are definitely not parallel to a normal person's. Seeing that he was about to kiss her again, Ning Xuemo desperately shouted, You're being disloyal to her by flirting with me. She definitely won't forgive you if she finds out. She's so cruel to me. Does she still need me to be loyal to her? Shui Ilan's voice was cold. Without saying anything else, he lowered his head and kissed her on the lips. The strong fragrance of the flowers was intoxicating. Ning Xuemo's mind went blank, and she subconsciously closed her mouth. The tip of his tongue seemed to have some kind of magical power. It was able to easily pry open her teeth and enter her mouth. Ning Xuemo was very anxious. She steeled her heart and wanted to bite him again. Suddenly, she felt a cold sensation on her throat. Something cold slid down her esophagus and into her stomach. Her body stiffened, and before she could react, Shui Ilan suddenly rolled off her body. Her face instantly turned pale, and her chest heaved up and down as she gasped for breath. His injuries had finally relapsed. He couldn't suppress it anymore. As soon as Ning Xuemo regained her freedom, she almost didn't think before jumping up and slapping him with her palm. Heart-linking voodoo. Shui Ilan quickly spat out these 3 words and successfully stopped Ning Xuemo's fatal strike. What? Her palm stopped at the side of his face. I fed you the heart-linking voodoo, Shui Ilan laughed as he gasped for breath. He laughed quite happily. If you kill me, you won't be able to live either. Ning Xuemo clenched her fists. She was originally a poison expert. Not only did she study all kinds of poisons, she was also not a layman when it came to poison-related voodoo. She knew that there was indeed a heart-linking voodoo in this world. It could forcefully link the fates of 2 people who didn't want to do the same thing. The reason why it was forceful was because the person who planted the voodoo and the person who planted the voodoo were not bound together for good or ill. It was because the person who planted the voodoo couldn't hurt the person who planted the voodoo. Otherwise, if the voodoo hurt the other person a little, it would be 10 times worse. Simply put, if Ning Xuemo slapped Shui Ilan now, she would have to be prepared for 10 slap. Chapter 522. To put it simply, heart-linking voodoo. Its function was, if Ning Shuamore slapped Shui Ilan once, she would have to be prepared to receive 10 slap. On the other hand, when Shui Ilan slapped Ning Shuamore, even if he slapped her 10 times, he would at most feel like he was slapped once, because refining this type of voodoo was very complicated, and the materials needed were very rare and difficult to collect. There were not many people who could refine this type of voodoo. She did not expect Shui Ilan to have one, and it was on her body. Was this bastard trying to make her his puppet? Ning Shuamore took a deep breath and did not bother to argue with Shui Ilan anymore. She ran out of the temple to vomit. The voodoo was wrapped in an ice shell. She had just swallowed it, so she might be able to vomit it out. A moment later, Ning Shuamore walked back with a pale face without saying a word. Shui Ilan was panting even harder, but he smiled at her. How is it? Did you vomit it out? Ning Shuamore didn't say anything and kicked him. Shui Ilan was kicked to the ground. Ning Shuamore felt a sudden pain in her waist, and she took a few steps back. She almost fell down as well. Shui Ilan laughed while lying on the ground. Good kick. Little Shuamore, do you want to kick this deity's lower back acupoint? Ning Shuamore gritted her teeth. Shui Ilan did not lie to her. He really did put the heart-linking voodoo in her. She kicked him, and the same part of her body felt like it had been kicked 10 times. It was burning with pain. The wound on her back waist was still there. If she was kicked again, she might faint from the pain. Fortunately, she did not use all her inner strength when she kicked him. Otherwise, he would vomit blood, and she would lose 3 liters of blood. She looked at Shui Ilan, who was lying on the ground laughing. It was her first time seeing him laugh so happily. Why did this bastard suddenly become so weak? I didn't see anyone hurt him. No matter how he got injured, this was a chance for her. Ning Shuamore narrowed her eyes. She grabbed his collar with one hand and lifted him up. She sneered, "Scoundrel, you will pay the price for what you did today." She casually threw him to the ground. Shui Ilan rolled on the ground. Ning Shuamore also fell and sat on the ground. Little Shuamore, it seems like you are not used to the heart-linking voodoo effect yet. Poor child. Shui Ilan looked at her sitting on the ground with a bright smile. Smile on his face. Ning Shuamore wished she could use her fist to punch his handsome face, but after thinking about it, she restrained herself. She stood up and smiled at him. It's funny, isn't it? It will be even funnier later. She thought for a while and pressed him down. Then, she searched his sleeves. She had to take this rare opportunity to find the things that this bastard had taken from her. She clearly remembered that Shui Ilan had put her belongings in his sleeves. She was afraid that this guy would do something bad, so she pressed him down and searched his sleeves. Shui Ilan's face was like a peach blossom. He sighed under her body. Little Shuamore, aren't you a bit too enthusiastic? I think it's better for a man to take the initiative. Ning Shuamore, shut up. Her hand inevitably touched Shui Ilan's arm. His arm was cold, but it felt good to the touch. He looked like an elegant gentleman, but she did not expect his arm to be so strong. Strong and strong. No wonder this bastard was so perverted. He hid his strength under his robe. Shui Ilan obediently laid there, letting her touch him all over his body. Chapter 523. Shui Ilan stared at her back view. His gaze was deep and unfathomable. Ning Shuamore felt goosebumps from his stare. She searched his sleeves for a long time but did not find anything. Bastard, where are my things? Ning Shuamore shouted. Shui Ilan's handsome face was slightly red, and his eyes seemed to be rippling with water. Try touching more places. Ning Shuamore. If it were not for the mind-linking venomous insect, she would have beaten him up. She didn't hold back and touched both of his sleeves. Then, she reached out to the front of his shirt. In this era, people usually kept their things in these 2 places. Inside the sleeves and the chest. Just as her hand reached into Shui Ilan's chest, his eyes became even more watery. Little Shuamore, are you trying to attack my chest? Ning Shuamore actually did not want to touch his chest. When she heard his voice, her hand trembled and the back of her hand bumped into a small protrusion on his chest. Although she was a virgin, she was a doctor after all. She was very clear about the structure of men. Naturally, she knew what she bumped into. She could not help but stiffen. Sure enough, I'm attacking your chest. Shui Ilan's voice was faint with a hint of intoxicating hoarseness. Ning Shuemore. She can't touch it anymore. She pulled her hand out and said fiercely, Shui Ilan, if you know what's good for you, you'd better hand over my things. What if I don't know what's good for me? Shui Ilan was curious. If you don't know what's good for you, I'll strip you naked and throw you out of the temple. I'll let everyone admire your naked body. Shui Ilan immediately straightened his body and obediently cooperated with her. That's not bad. Please strip me naked and admire me. Ning Shuemore. She was speechless when she met such a thick-skinned non-human who could not be hit. At the moment, he really couldn't think of any solution. Shui Ilan looked at her with a resigned expression. Everyone says that you have to pay back your debt quickly. I just took off your clothes, and now it's your turn to take off mine. Come, take it off. Ning Shuemore paused for a moment. Then, she suddenly sneered and reached out to take off his red robe. Shui Ilan was shocked and pursed his lips. This girl really dared to take off his clothes. He didn't have much strength now, and he also wanted to see where Ning Shuemore's bottom line was. He might as well let her do as she wished. In a short moment, he had already been stripped down to his underwear. He reclined there, his black hair draped over his shoulders, winding under his jade-like skin. There was actually a kind of flirtatious beauty. Ning Shuemore felt that this scene was vaguely familiar, as if she had seen it in a manga master's drawing. It was a standard picture of a little bottom lying lazily in bed. Evil. Ning Shuemore shifted her gaze away from his body and began to search the robes he had taken off. After a while, she gave up and threw the robe aside. Then, she glared at Shui Ilan hatefully. That guy was now only left with a pair of extremely thin underwear, and she couldn't see any pockets on his underwear. He couldn't possibly hide all her things in his underwear, right? Shui Ilan's anus tightened when she stared at him. He subconsciously tightened his legs, and his face was full of chastity. You won't really take off my clothes, right? Ning Shuemore, forget it. The ancient people here usually didn't wear underwear. If she really took off his underwear, she was afraid that he would really be naked. Although she had seen men naked before, that was because she had to save someone. Now that he obviously couldn't hide anything in his underwear, why would she take it off? She wasn't that wretched. She glanced at Shui Ilan. It was rare to see this bastard nervous. Chapter 524. She had a mischievous thought and simply tore all the clothes he took off into a pile of rags. Didn't this bastard like to be refined and well-dressed? She wanted him to run around naked in his underwear. She wanted him to embarrass himself once. Shui Ilan looked at her with his eyes wide open. After a while, he laughed. Little Shuemore, do you think that my body is quite good and want to keep looking? Actually, even if you don't destroy my clothes, you can still look at me whenever you want. Ning Shuemore tilted her head and looked at him. She blinked her big eyes. Really? Your body is really not bad. I don't think it's interesting for me to look at it myself. I need more people to look at it. Damn, it was a pity that there were no cameras in this era. If there were, she could take pictures of him from different angles and post them on Weibo, WeChat, and forums to expose this bastard. However, even if she couldn't take pictures now, she could still call more people to look at his embarrassing appearance and vent her anger. After she finished speaking, she clapped her hands and stood up. Then she walked out in large strides. Little Shuemore, actually I really want to fulfill your wish. Unfortunately, there is no one within a few 100 miles of here. Even if you want to find someone, you won't be able to find him. Shui Ilan seemed to be a little regretful. Ning Shuemore's footsteps paused. She snorted and rushed out of the door. Was she thinking of escaping by herself? Shui Ilan's eyes flashed and his lips slightly hooked up. If that girl really had this idea, she would regret it. Only Shui Ilan was left in the ruined temple. It was quiet for a while. Shui Ilan slowly propped himself up from the ground and sat down to meditate again. He had to seize every second to recover. In the battle with Han Shanyu in the palace, he was slightly injured. Even one of the strings of the Blackwave zither was damaged. He treasured his zither and did not hesitate to use a forbidden technique to absorb the zither spirits of various zithers to repair the Blackwave zither. However, at the last moment, it was destroyed by Han Shanyu. Not only did it break the zither string, it also added to his injuries. He had never expected to meet such a powerful opponent in the human world, and he knew that he could not meet force with force in his condition. He could only choose to temporarily stay away. He was obsessed with fixing his Blackwave zither. He had heard that Daliang City was a famous zither city, and thought that there would be plenty of zither players in the city. That was why he had come here. Coincidentally, there was an annual Guqin recital in Daliang City. Almost all of Shanghai City's most renowned Guqin players were on that ship. He felt that this was an excellent opportunity, so he found an opportunity to approach the ship. However, he discovered Ning Xuemo's aura on the ship. He didn't know what he was thinking about this little girl, so he set up a trap at the back of the ship in advance. He had planned all of this very carefully, and he had taken every step with great care. She was in the light, while he was in the dark. Ning Xuemo, who was as cunning as a little fox, really fell into his trap. She had become the object in his net and his prisoner. Shui Ilan was very happy to be able to catch her again. When he saw her jumping around in anger, he was even happier. He was so happy that he almost forgot about his injuries. If he only wanted to take the zither spirits, he could do it at the lake. He had plenty of ways to make those people listen to him. However, with Ning Xuemo, there were many more variables. To be safe, he used his telekinesis to use the fog demon transporting technique and moved the ship to the chaotic river thousands of miles away. Everything went smoothly after that. Everything went according to his plan. Chapter 525. Those people had no choice but to agree to Shui Ilan's conditions. The only thing that was out of his expectations was that Ning Xuemo was actually engaged to someone else, and it was a heavenly marriage. There was a special characteristic of a heavenly marriage. Once the person engaged to the heavenly marriage had an extramarital affair, they would be struck by lightning. If she was not willing, then the person who was struck by lightning would be the one who tried to force himself on her. If she was willing, then both of them would be struck. Shui Ilan had only heard of heavenly marriages, but he had never seen one before, so he did not believe it. In order to verify this, he purposely tried to get close to Ning Xuemo. Although he was careful, he was still struck by lightning. This made his injuries even worse. Fortunately, it was not as if he did not gain anything. He successfully absorbed the Guqin souls of more than 20 people, and finally repaired the zither string. Originally, he only needed to take the last group of people's Guqin souls, and his zither would be completely repaired. However, he did not expect that the cold and ruthless Ning Xuemo would take the risk for the last group of people, and become their hostage. He did not want to see Ning Xuemo die in the hands of others, so he could only agree to Yi Feng's conditions and let the group of people go. At this moment, Shui Ilan's internal injury was already very serious. When he was running with Ning Xuemo, he was a bit powerless. He was unable to set up a barrier to protect her from the hurricane, causing her injuries to worsen. Midway, his sixth sense came into play again, and he sensed that his nemesis, Han Shanyu, was about to arrive. He was definitely not Han Shanyu's match now, so he decided to go all out, and used the last of his psychokinesis to open the Gate of Ghost, and went in. When he reached the ruined temple, he was already at the end of his rope, and could only stop to rest. Because Shui Ilan was exhausted, sealing Ning Xuemo's acupuncture points was a little difficult, and the effect was not as strong. This caused her to wake up midway. Although he was exhausted, it was more than enough to deal with Ning Xuemo, who had just woken up. Finally, at the last moment, he made her eat his GU worm. He had truly restrained her. However, this little girl was obviously not restrained, and she should have other tricks up her sleeve. After a while, Ning Xuemo came back. She dashed into the dilapidated temple like a gust of wind. Before Shwe Ilan could react, she threw a black and sticky object into his arms. Shwe Ilan lowered his head and looked at the thing in his arms. It looked like an oversized cage, and there were many nests on the cage. It was a huge beehive. And it was the hive of the world's most poisonous and powerful black peak. In that instant, he understood what Ning Shuamore wanted to do. His expression changed, and he raised his hand to throw the beehive away. Unexpectedly, there was some sticky honey on the beehive. The beehive stuck to his pants and he couldn't pull it off. Almost at the same time, he heard a buzzing sound. When he looked up, he saw a black cloud rushing towards him. Black Peak. And it was a whole nest of black peaks. This girl actually attacked Black Peak's nest to take revenge on him. There were thousands of black peaks in this swarm, and they were rushing towards him from all directions. Being stung by one black peak would be painful, and if he was stung by such a big nest of black peaks, Shwe Ilan didn't dare to imagine what would happen to him. He rolled on the ground and threw the troublesome beehive away. These black peaks would recognize their own nests. Some of the black peaks ran towards their own nests, and some of the black peaks were very vengeful. They treated Shwe Ilan, who was stained with honey, as the main culprit. Chapter 526. The wasps buzzed as they chased after Shwe Ilan, as if they couldn't vent their anger if they didn't stab him until his head was full of bumps. Ning Shuamore crossed her arms and stood not far away, looking at Shwe Ilan's figure running around like a ghost. In this life-and-death situation, although Shwe Ilan's injuries were serious, he was still able to unleash his body's greatest potential. His movements were even smoother than a leopard cat. How could he still be as weak as before? Sure enough, a person's potential was like water in a sponge. There would still be some if squeezed. Seeing him run away in such a sorry state, Ning Shuamore's heart was finally able to vent a bit of her resentment. This bastard still underestimated her. She couldn't kill him herself because of the heart-linking voodoo, but couldn't she call for help? These black wasps were her best helpers. They could stab him to death 70 to 80 times. Ning Shuamore, my heart-linking voodoo is different from others. Not only can you not hurt me, if I get hurt, you will also feel the pain. If I get stung, you won't be able to escape. Shwe Ilan rushed towards Ning Shuamore. He obviously wanted her to help him intercept these black wasps. Ning Shuamore's figure flashed and dodged like a ghost. She didn't believe his nonsense. She would get hurt if she stung him. She had never heard of heart-linking voodoo having such an ability. She didn't want to be tricked by him. She stood coldly on the high ground, looking at him getting more and more miserable. You don't believe me? Shwe Ilan's movement technique paused for a moment. A black peak crashed into his body and fiercely pierced his arm. Ning Shuamore's left arm suddenly hurt, as if she was stung by a wasp. She almost fell from the beam. Her left arm hurt like a knife, causing her forehead to be covered with sweat. It was the pain of being stung by a wasp. This bastard was actually telling the truth. This time, Ning Shuamore didn't dare to take the risk anymore. She jumped and ran towards the beehive, then slowly whistled. The whistle was not a tune, but it had its own style. Strangely enough, the black peaks that were chasing after Shwe Ilan paused in mid-air. Then, they all flew towards Ning Shuamore and entered the beehive on the ground. A moment later, all the black peaks returned to the beehive, and the ruined temple regained its tranquility. Shwe Ilan fell to the ground. His face was pale, but his deep eyes shone in the dark night. You actually know how to control bees. Ning Shuamore sneered and did not answer his question. This was a special skill that she had cultivated in her previous life. She could use her whistle to attract bees and butterflies, which was comparable to Xiao Longnu of the ancient tomb sect. When she went out just now, she found this beehive under a big tree. First, she tried to control the beehive with the whistles she used in her previous life. After she succeeded, she plucked this huge beehive to sting him. Originally, she thought that these bees would be able to take away half of Shwe Ilan's life, but she didn't expect the heart-linking voodoo to have such a perverted ability. Ning Shuamore was so angry that her teeth were itching. She looked at Shwe Ilan who was sitting there, and her heart was filled with regret. It seemed that she couldn't take this opportunity to get rid of him. She could make the antidote for the heart-linking voodoo herself, but the ingredients needed were troublesome. She couldn't gather them in such a short time. She could only wait until she was free. The bee venom on her arm was still hurting, and all the medicine on her body had been taken away by Shwe-Elan. She couldn't apply any medicine even if she wanted to. Luckily, it was only one area. She endured for 6 hours, and the bee venom was automatically removed. Catch. Shwe-Elan flipped his hand, and a small green bottle appeared in his palm. He threw it to her. Chapter 527. Ning Xuemore took the bottle and looked at it. Her eyebrows moved. This bottle was hers. The medicine in the bottle could not only cure the bee venom, but it could also cure sword wounds. She subconsciously wanted to apply the medicine to her arm, but when she pulled up her sleeves, she remembered that she was not poisoned. It was that bastard who was stung. If he was in pain, then she would not have a good time either. She unwillingly threw the bottle to him. Apply it to the stung area. Shwe-Elan caught the bottle. In the dark night, his eyes sparkled. Little Xuemore, so you can't bear to part with me. Can't bear to part with you, my ass. If it wasn't for the fact that his injuries hurt her, she wouldn't have cared about him at all. Ning Xuemore did not want to care about him anymore. She turned around and walked out of the temple. Since she could not kill him, she could only take this opportunity to escape. Otherwise, once this bastard recovered, she would not have a good time. Seeing her figure disappear in front of the temple, Shwe-Elan suddenly smiled. He suddenly realized that he liked her even more and wanted to keep her by his side even more. He sat up straight and closed his eyes. He meditated and silently counted in his heart, 1, 2, 3. He did not count quickly. It was like a second hand. When he counted to 60, a black shadow flashed by the door. A person flew back. With a scream, she slammed into his chest. Fortunately, Shwe-Elan was already prepared. The moment she flew back, he immediately made a move. With a twist of his wrist, he removed most of the force from her body. Even so, her strength still caused his body to sway, and he almost fell down. Ning Xuemore simply wanted to curse. After she left the temple, she did not see any movement from Shwe-Elan. She was secretly glad that she had escaped from the wolf's claws. She was also afraid that a long delay would cause trouble, so she immediately ran away. But unexpectedly, after running for more than a mile, his heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he actually flew back involuntarily. She didn't run very fast, but the speed at which she flew back was astonishing. She desperately tried to adjust her body in the air, but to no avail. It flew back like a bird returning to its nest. The moment she threw herself into that person's embrace, she heard him chuckle softly. Then, she felt her ribs go numb, and her entire body went limp as she fell into the other person's embrace. Little Xuemore, I know you've missed me, but I can't enjoy such a passionate hug. Shwe-Elan placed her on his lap and stroked her lips with his fingers. Ning Xuemore, her vision turned black, and she felt extremely sleepy. She knew something was wrong, so she forced her eyelids open and glared at him. Bastard, you poisoned me. Shwe-Elan smiled brightly. Little Xuemore, I just accidentally pricked you with a needle, and this needle is yours. Ning Xuemore felt dizzy. She finally understood what kind of poison she had been poisoned with. It was indeed a poison needle that she had developed herself. Its effect was similar to an anesthetic needle. It did not cause much harm to the human body, but it could make people sleep for half a day. It was originally a weapon for her to protect herself, but she did not expect that it would become his accomplice. A strong sense of sleepiness came over her, and her vision turned black. She did not know anything. Shwe-Elan saw that she had finally settled down in his arms, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. He lowered his head and kissed her lips gently. Little girl, my heart-linking venomous insect has a unique function that I haven't told you about. The person who has been poisoned cannot be more than 2 li away from the person who poisoned you. Once you exceed this range, you have to obediently fly back. Chapter 528. Shwe Ilan placed Ning Shuamore on the futon next to him. Then he took out a few pills and put them in his mouth. One day. If he had one day, he would be able to recover most of his martial arts and do what he wanted to do. Karine did not dare to look at Han Shanue's face anymore. Although Master Han had been very calm and did things in an orderly manner, Karine could sense that Karine was very sensitive. However, the little Chelene was keenly aware that his mood had always been suppressed, just like the calm before the storm. It couldn't help but be alarmed, and didn't dare to say a single word of nonsense along the way. They had reached the chaotic river and even found the sunken ship. Karine even fished up a few strands of human hair, a broken jade pendant, and a few broken bones. Karine still could not feel any trace of Ning Shuamore. Fortunately, other than the occasional panic and pain, there were no other symptoms. If Karine was still alive, it meant that Ning Shuamore was also alive. At least, she did not meet with any mishap. Karine was a little relieved. Logically speaking, since they had already found this place, with Karine's nose, he should be able to find Ning Shuamore's scent and track her down. But, no. He could not smell her scent at all. The surrounding air seemed to have been cleansed by someone. All traces of her scent had been erased. How could this be? The ship had clearly sunk here. Master could not have left early. After Han Shanyu asked Karine a few questions, he said softly, "The art of disappearing trace." He did not expect Shwe Ilan to be so careful. Could it be that he had already guessed that Han Shanyu was here? Although it was the first time Karine heard of this art, he could guess from the name. He cursed, that pervert. He was even more worried about his master. He clenched his claws tightly. He did not give up and walked around again. When he came back, he saw a scene that made him stunned. Han Shanue's sleeves fluttered as he stood on the surface of the river. No one knew what kind of spell he was making, but a chilly wind blew around him. Within the chilly wind, there were faint silhouettes. Soul congregation spell. Generally speaking, to use this kind of technique, one would need to use some magic tools and also do some preparation work. The little Chelene had personally seen the big brother who went into the stone essence cave with it use this kind of technique. The procedures were very complicated, and at that time, it was very tired just watching from the side. Who would have thought that the new heavenly master, Mr. Han Shanyu, would be able to use it so easily? Furthermore, this one move had attracted over 30 of them. It was too awesome. The souls floated around Han Shanyu. More than 20 of them had blank faces, as if they had lost their main souls. They half knelt at Han Shanue's feet and only knew how to kowtow. They didn't even know how to answer his question. Fortunately, there were still 8 or 9 of them who seemed to be conscious. They bowed and opened their mouths, as if they were answering Han Shanue's question. Karine was curious and was about to walk over to take a look when Han Shanyu sent a message, "Stop. You have too much yang energy, it will kill them." Karine could only wait. After a while, Han Shanyu waved his sleeves and flicked his finger. In the air, a cloud-covered heavenly path appeared, leading straight into the depths of the river. The souls stepped onto the cloud-covered path one by one. Only a female soul seemed reluctant to leave. She surrounded Han Shanyu and kept whining. It seemed like she wanted to stay by his side and be a servant. Chapter 529. The sorcerers in this world did raise little ghosts. Karine could tell that Master Han was an expert in this field, and he probably lacked little ghosts that could run errands and fight. Karine thought that he would keep her. But who would have thought that after the little ghost said a few words to Han Shanyu seemed to have lost his patience. He flicked his finger and a white wind flashed by. The female little ghost screamed and her soul was torn into pieces, dissipating in the air in an instant. Karine was speechless. This master was too heartless. Even if he did not keep the girl by his side, there was no need to destroy her soul, right? It thought that even if he did not keep her, he would still release her soul. This master seemed to be more violent today. Master, you are the guardian of the vast sky kingdom. You should be merciful and fair. You should be afraid of hurting the lives of ants when you sweep the floor. You should protect the lanterns with moths and not hurt the living. That girl only wanted to stay by your side to be a little ghost, that's all. If you scatter her soul like this, won't you lose your guardhood? The little Chelene felt that this heavenly master's behavior was a little bit ruining its three views. Han Shanyu glanced at it. Didn't you just get the title of Master of Heaven? Did he mean that he was not used to this new identity? Kirin nodded. Yes, you just got the title, so you have to follow the rules of the Master of Heaven. Who told you that this is the rule of the Master of Heaven? Han Shanyue's tone was still indifferent. I always follow my heart. I am the Master of Heaven. I am the rule. These words were simply too arrogant. Kirin was not convinced and said, I heard that this rule was set by the Overlord. Do you dare to go against his rules? Are you more powerful than the Overlord? Han Shanyue's eyes flashed and suddenly flicked his finger. A white light flashed by and the little Chelene cried out as it somersaulted and fell straight into the water. You didn't improve much, but your ability to talk nonsense has improved. Han Shanyue's eyes were cold as he looked at it coldly. The little Chelene touched the newly popped green bump on its forehead and jumped out of the water. It was still somewhat puzzled. How did he know that what he said just now was nonsense? Maybe he knew who set the rules of the Master of Heaven? Or maybe he knew the Overlord very well and knew that he would not care about other people's business. Don't think about it. Hurry up and ask them where they went. Han Shanyue's tone was a bit impatient. Huh? Ask who? How? Kirin did not respond. Han Shanyu looked at it as if it was an idiot. Master of the Master of Heaven, is this Chelene fake? Master of Heaven. It had actually forgotten about its innate ability. It coughed. I forgot. It didn't dare to dawdle and immediately used its beast language to summon the monsters in the river to inquire about the whereabouts of Ning Shuamore and Qin Wentian. Kirin. Han Shanyu stood there and looked at Kirin Shanyu. This Kirin beast was really going to be raised into a cat. There were a lot of monsters in the river. Although they hadn't gained wisdom, they could still understand the little Chelene's words. They also had an instinctive fear of it, so they didn't hide anything from the little Chelene's questions. Some of the monsters saw the direction that Xue Ilan and Ning Shuamore escaped. Some of them had chased after Yang Ziyuan. Chapter 530. After all, these monsters did not have intelligence, and their thoughts were still a mess. Moreover, they had an even worse problem, which was that they were colorblind. They did not know who was in red or blue, therefore, when they answered the little Chelene's questions, they were always vague and ambiguous, giving specious answers. These two groups of people were also confused. Kirin had a headache listening to them, and could only reflect their meaning to Han Shanyu. Han Shanyu looked at Kirin with a pained expression. Do you think Xue Ilan would take the water route? It must be the one that flew in the air. The little Chelene touched the bruise on its forehead with a guilty conscience. It felt that its IQ was a little low recently, but when Han Shanyu looked at it as if it was an idiot, it felt a little hurt. I was too anxious about Master's whereabouts, so I didn't think it through. He did not dare to say any more nonsense, and immediately asked the monsters which direction they flew in. The monsters looked at each other again, and then two monsters spoke. These two monsters saw two groups of people. One group was Xue Ilan, and the other group was Yi Qingwan. Not only were they colorblind, they were also face-blind. In their eyes, they could not differentiate between men and women. Fortunately, these two groups of people were going in the same direction, so Kirin did not feel too troubled, and told Han Shanyu the details. Han Shanyu left without saying anything, and Kirin hurriedly followed. As long as he knew the general direction, he would be able to catch up to Xue Ilan. After all, the evading trace consumed a lot of telekinesis, and with Xue Ilan's current condition, he would not be able to use this method for long, and he would definitely reveal his scent later. Han Shanyue's prediction was correct, and after one man and one beast chased in that direction for about 70 to 80 miles, the scent of Ning Shuamore and Xue Ilan finally appeared in the air. Kirin was happy and worried at the same time. He was happy that he could finally smell his master's scent again. He was worried because his master's scent was entangled with Shwe Elan's scent. It seemed that his master could not escape from Shwe Elan's grasp. He did not know if Shwe Elan, that perverted bastard, had tortured her yet. He was worried, and he said it out loud, "Will that bastard fry my master first and then kill her?" Before he could finish his sentence, Han Shanue's head was slapped again. Han Shanue's voice was like ice. "Little apple, if I hear you say that word again, I will cook you first and then fry you." The little Chaline's head was burning, and it didn't dare to speak any more nonsense. It concentrated on sniffing for its master's aura. After searching for about 2 to 3 li, the little Chaline suddenly stopped. Master and Shwe Elan Shwe's scent were disappeared. It circled around the area for a while before finally confirming that it couldn't find it. Master, did he use the evading trace again? Kareen was puzzled. Han Shanyu did not answer. He made a hand seal as if he was sensing something. After a while, he said in a deep voice, "He opened the ghost path." Kareen was stunned. Of course, he knew about the ghost path. The ghost path was not an ordinary path in the human world, but a path hidden in the secondary space. This path could only be opened by someone with great telekinesis. For example, in the Kirin clan, only elders had the ability to open it. The ghost path was different from ordinary paths. Ordinary paths had a direction and a beginning and an end. However, the ghost path was directionless and followed the ghost path's will. Chapter 531. Everyone's ghost path was different. Unless they thought of the same destination, they would not meet in the ghost path. Which direction did Shwe Elan want to go after activating the ghost path? Kareen had no clue at all. He could not help but look at Han Shanyu. Han Shanyue's face was gloomy. After so many years, this was the first time he met such a cunning and troublesome opponent. He flipped his wrist, and a faint golden sound transmission talisman appeared in his palm. Thousands of miles away, on Buddha Lotus Mountain where the Sun Moon sect was located, the head general manager, who was in charge of all the Sun Moon sect's affairs, was arranging the day's affairs in his study. One of the white jade walls suddenly lit up with a luster. The head general manager's eyes widened in shock. After being stunned for a moment, he hurriedly knelt in front of the wall and said solemnly, "Ancestor." After the ancestor left the mountain, he would not easily contact them, because there was almost nothing in this world that he could not solve. Even if he contacted them, he would ask about the sect's affairs and so on. When he contacted them, he would use the sound transmission talisman and not the heavenly sound wall. The heavenly sound wall would only be activated by the ancestor when something major happened. And the order from the heavenly sound wall was the highest order. It required all the Sun Moon sect's disciples to move out in large numbers. There was no room for objection. They had to succeed, they could not fail. The head general manager's heart was thumping wildly. He thought that something major had happened, but he did not expect the faint golden characters on the heavenly sound wall to light up one by one. All disciples, within 1,000 miles of the chaotic river, search for a red-clothed man and a woman with him at all costs. Send news to me within 6 hours. Although the head general manager was bewildered, he did not dare to delay. He immediately replied, "Yes, ancestor." He suddenly stood up and hurriedly went to arrange things. The Sun Moon sect had more than 10,000 disciples. Who knew how many spies they had arranged in various countries? It could be said that they were intertwined and complicated. In this way, no matter where on this continent there was a change, the Sun Moon sect would immediately know and make the corresponding arrangements. There was nothing in this world that the Sun Moon sect did not know. Their intelligence network was richer and more accurate than any other country's. The Sun Moon sect would not easily interfere with the affairs of these countries. Usually, they would just organize the information. They were detached from the outside world. However, once he interfered, he would use thunderous methods that no one could defy. As for the spies arranged in the various countries, they were all clever and sly people who could take charge of their own affairs. Normally, These people would not be easily touched, as long as they reported to him on time. Now that the ancestor had issued this order, everyone had to move out. A moment later, all the Sun Moon sect scouts on the entire continent received the same order to search for the red-robed man within 500 kilometers of the chaotic river. Although everyone received the same orders, the areas they were assigned to search were different. They covered the entire area within 1,000 miles of the chaotic river. These people immediately moved out and began a carpet search around the primal chaos river. As long as the red-clothed man was in the area drawn by the ancestor, even if he hid in a mouse hole, these people could still find him. Kirin naturally did not know that Han Shanyu had just lightly written a few lines of words on the light golden talisman, and had already given an order that could shake the entire world. After he finished writing, he put away the golden talisman. Chapter 532. Kirin stared at him. Subconsciously, it thought that this person was omnipotent and would have a good way to find its master. It was waiting for him to do something else, such as opening the gate of ghost or something. Unexpectedly, after he put away the talisman, he turned around and went ashore. He sat down on a platform and closed his eyes to meditate. At this time, he still had the mood to meditate. Kirin's scales almost stood up. It rushed in front of him. "You're not looking for my master?" Han Shanyu ignored it and continued meditating. "She's your concubine. I heard that a concubine is also a kind of wife. Your wife was taken away by another man, aren't you worried?" Kirin was furious. "She's not." Han Shanyu finally spoke. His voice was cold. "She ran away from the marriage." Kirin choked. "She did run away from the marriage. But you don't want her anymore?" It looked up and asked again. Han Shanyu finally opened his eyes. His voice was cold. "Why must I want a girl who ran away before the wedding? Since she ran away, there's no room for her to regret. Then this marriage is not valid." Kirin didn't know what to feel. It was as if it was angry for its master, but also as if it was relieved for its master. After all, it knew that Ning Shuamore was very unwilling to be married to this person as a concubine. Han Shanyu closed his eyes again and didn't speak. "Then you really don't want to look for my master?" Kirin didn't give up. Han Shanyu only replied with one word: "Wait." He had already made arrangements. Those people had already started a carpet search. No matter which side had the news, he would be the first to know. Shui Ilan opened the gate of ghost at this place, so this place was the center and radiated in all directions. Therefore, he stayed here to ensure that he would rush over as soon as he got the news. He was now chasing blindly without any direction. Not only would it waste his telekinesis, but it might also be counterproductive if he went in the wrong direction. At this time, it was better to stay still. Therefore, waiting here was the best way. He was never a talkative person, and he didn't like to explain to others. Not to mention explaining to Kirin, who had the intelligence of an 8 or 9-year-old child. Kirin was infuriated by the word wait. Its owner's life was in danger at all times, and it was even more urgent than the fire in the room. Yet, he was actually waiting here calmly. How despicable. Kirin was enraged. He opened his mouth and spat out a large ice ball. He threw it at Han Shanyu. "You cold-blooded bastard. No wonder my master is unwilling to marry you. You deserve to be a bachelor." After smashing the puck, it turned around and ran forward. When Han Shanyu was meditating, there was a protective barrier around his body. Even if he was hit, it wouldn't hurt. When the ice ball approached the top of his head, it was blown away by the boundary energy and turned into a pile of small ice balls that fell to the ground. Han Shanyu opened his eyes and looked at the shattered ice balls around him. His lips twitched. This Kirin really needs to be taught a lesson. How dare he throw an ice ball at him? Impulsive and willful, doing things without thinking of the consequences, this personality was a bit like its owners. He looked sideways at Kirin, who was running away. His gaze was faintly complicated. He meditated for a while. In the end, he opened his eyes because of his restlessness. After a while, He sighed and took out a light blue conch from his chest. He used his fingers to cast a spell. Chapter 533. After the faint white light flashed, the blue conch became transparent like crystal and gradually transformed into a ripple-like mirror in front of his eyes. The mirror gradually became clear. What was reflected in it was not Han Shanyu, but a luxurious and romantic building. The hibiscus tent was warm, and the curtains of the bed were lowered. A young master was lying on the bed. As if he had sensed something, the young man who was sleeping soundly suddenly opened his eyes and looked straight at the mirror. Deizwa. His lips twitched, and he suddenly sat up. Deizwa, why are you snooping in the middle of the night? Fortunately, there were no beauties in his room. Otherwise, it would be embarrassing. Romue Tianlan, help me do something. Han Shanyu didn't talk nonsense with him and went straight to the point. The young master was Romue Tianlan. When he heard Han Shanyue's words, his eyes immediately brightened. Please instruct me, Deizwa. This Deizwa didn't easily ask for help. He might not even ask for help once in a few thousand years. Now, he actually asked for help. What a miracle. What could it be that Deizwa couldn't solve by himself? Romue Tianlan's gossipy cells immediately burned, and his eyes lit up. All his drowsiness disappeared. Use your Heaven's Eye technique to check the surroundings of the primal chaos river. See if there are any abnormal fluctuations of psychokinesis. Find this person. Han Shanyu flashed a portrait of Shui Ilan in the mirror. Romue Tianlan whistled. What a beautiful man, poetic and picturesque. I didn't expect there to be such a masterpiece in the lower bound. Han Shanyue's eyes twitched, and he said coldly, stop talking nonsense. Find him quickly. Yes, sir. Romue Tianlan jumped off the bed, and his pajamas automatically turned into a light blue robe. He looked like an elegant young man. He was still a little curious. Deizwa, this is the first time I see you looking for someone so urgently. Who is this person? A devil cultivator. Han Shanyu only replied with 4 words. No wonder there is a touch of demonic charm and evil aura between his eyebrows. He is a devil cultivator. Deizwa painted him so well. It seems like this person left a deep impression on Deizwa. Romue Tianlan's elegant face was full of gossip. Han Shanyu, Romue Tianlan couldn't help but add, Deizwa, so, you aren't innately cold, but you are interested in men. You weren't distracted during the chess game because of him, right? Han Shanyu suddenly smiled. He didn't smile easily, but this smile made Romue Tianlan shiver. Romue Tianlan, if I'm interested in men, I won't let you go. Romue Tianlan immediately hugged his own body with a face of chastity. Deizwa, I can shed my blood to be your little attendant, but I will never sell my body. Han Shanyu, Romue Tianlan, if you speak any more nonsense then I will go to your carefree island and flatten your fruit trees. This sentence clearly hit Romue Tianlan's weak spot. He immediately closed his fan and begged for mercy. Deizwa, can this lowly one be wrong? Don't flatten my trees, they are my lifeblood. If the trees live, I live. If the trees die, I die. I will cast a spell to find him. As he spoke the last sentence, he had already begun to cast a spell. His hands formed a seal, and his body floated up, rushing out of the luxurious building and into the air. The water mirror in front of Han Shanyu, which had been following Romue Tianlan, also followed him outside. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.